This special 158th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg episode is brought to you by TR Historical. If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There you'll find apparel, decor, and gear, and for listening to this show, you will receive 10% off plus free shipping within the U.S. if you use promo code GBERG1863. That's trhistorical.com, TR Historical, for the love of history.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this special anniversary episode of Addressing Gettysburg. Not our anniversary, but the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. It's July 1st, and we have with us a couple of guides who you might know from the last year. They've been on the show for the first time. This is both your second times, I believe, on the show. We have Kohr coming back with us and Tracy Baer. Hello, guys. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. All right. So let's get right into it because these usually take a little longer, these episodes here. We're going to get into an overview of the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. So we put out an episode yesterday for June 30th. Tracy, you did that one as well. And so you have a bit of a background there. So just for people who might have skipped over that one and just want to get right to the battle, let's give us a brief history of the invasion. Why are they even up here in the first place?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but for the sake of brevity, we'll only touch on a couple of them. General Lee obviously was looking for the Union Army. That's the biggie, right? You want to do battle. You want to try to beat this army and win the war. So he is actively, both armies are actively looking for one another. Lee is also moving northward simply because his army's hungry. You know, the old Napoleon adage, an army moves on its stomach, is, you know, it's true. And Lee's army, as well as the other Confederate armies throughout the country, they're all hungry. They're all lacking supplies. He just can't get them. And Pennsylvania is a very fertile ground for supplies, untouched by the war, essentially. So Lee's on a great big shopping spree. Lee also hopes to hopefully make an impression on the northern population who is growing weary of this prolonged war. They're tired of reading the names of the casualties in the northern newspapers. So if he can have some type of positive for him and for his cause effect on the northern population and possibly put some pressure on the Lincoln administration to perhaps sit down for a negotiated peace. You know, let's bring the war to the north and show them what they've been missing in essence.
Because their ultimate goal, which I don't think we repeat enough on here, is to break away from the United States, not to take it over. It's independence is what they're looking for.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so real quick, what is it like in Virginia where they're coming from? Why can't they get food? Why do they need to come up here for it?
Part of the major problem is, first of all, the armies have been in a fairly stagnant position in Virginia for some time. So the areas where they're in, both armies have picked clean. Another factor, and I think this doesn't get looked at as often as it should, is the fact that by 1863, the southern railroads are breaking down. I've done a lot of research on Civil War railroads over the years, and the vast majority of industry that built and repaired railroad equipment was in the north. And the railroads of that time period, the rails had about a shelf life of about 2 years before they needed to be replaced.
Okay.
And we're 2 years into the war, so southern railroads are starting to fall apart. They've got plenty of supplies, they're just at the wrong place.
Right, okay.
So
and Pennsylvania, of course, is lush and untouched, and so that's where we need to come in. Okay, so set up, what does it look like here around Gettysburg early in the morning when the sun's coming up? Who's here? Who's out there? What's going on?
Well, like I said, the armies are looking for one another, but here around Gettysburg, there's very few men. You only have in the morning of July 1st, in town or just to the west and north of town, What is it, Rich? About 2,400 cavalrymen, somewhere in that
roughly,
neighborhood?
yeah. That's about what Buford has.
Buford, two of Buford's brigades out of 3 in the division are here, so he's not even here fully staffed.
Right.
So there are around the area, and they are sending out what we call vedettes. It's just a handful of troopers on their horses out across the road network from the southwest, the Fairfield Road, clear around here where we are in Oak Hill, clear around to the York Road. And they're just acting as radar. They're just patrolling the roads. Other than that, the Union force is the only, the Union has 7 infantry corps, and there's only 2 that morning nearby, and nearby is, subjective. There's only 2 the night before that's in Pennsylvania. So we have some that are starting to rustle and move this way. As far as the Confederates go, they're starting to congregate around Cashtown area, but General Meade, the commander of the Union forces, is still 14 miles away in Taneytown, Maryland, and Lee is maybe in Greenwood over on the other side of the mountain range on his way here. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of men here, but those who are here for the Union are actively watching.
Okay. People often ask this question. Explain a vedette. What is a vedette? Exactly.
It's essentially an outpost.
An outpost.
So the best way to think about the cavalry is you've got the main body of the cavalry is congregated primarily in the fields west of Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. But you're going to put vedettes on the different roads approaching town. And, of course, we always hear about the 10 roads coming into Gettysburg. Those vedettes are covering 7 of the 10 roads. Mm-hmm. Because they know there's Confederates west and north of Gettysburg, but they don't know how far out they are, which roads they may be on. So this is your early warning system is the best way to think about it.
Okay.
And because of the open nature of the terrain, you also have vedettes kind of between those roads. As long as the vedette post can see the next one,
right,
nobody's going to slip through.
Okay.
So that's essentially what we're dealing with.
So then it's the roads and then the land between the roads, mm-hmm. and behind the vedettes, what's there? Immediately, because they're miles out from the main line.
Yeah, it varies depending on which road we're talking about.
Let's talk about the Chambersburg Pike.
Okay, Chambersburg Pike, the vedette post, which is where the first shot of the battle is fired, mm-hmm. and that first shot is essentially a warning shot because when Lieutenant Marcellus Jones, the guy that's traditionally credited with firing the first shot, fires towards the Confederates, they're roughly half a mile down the road. He's got a weapon that fires about 80 yards.
Right.
So he's not trying to hit anybody.
Yeah.
Plus, he's got 4 guys, and there's roughly 3,000 Confederates coming down the road. And even though he's from Chicago, where they're used to shooting at people, he's young. My apologies to everybody from Chicago who may be listening. Okay. He's trying to alert the guys behind him, and he's about 1.5 miles out from the closest,
reserves.
Significant body of Union cavalry.
Right.
But the sound of the gunshot's going to travel.
Right, and it's also going to stop the approaching Confederate column because if they're hearing a shot, they got to make sure of what it is, right?
Right.
Yes.
So they're going to have to shake out some skirmishers and advance slowly now, which is Buford's...
Well, you're going from an efficient column marching down the road to spreading out shoulder to shoulder in a line of battle, and what happens then, if you're not on the road, you're slowed down significantly by the terrain.
And this is really Buford's goal.
Slow them down.
Right.
Yeah, buy time.
Slow them down, buy time for Reynolds to come up with the infantry.
Just trading land for time.
Okay. Now, the cavalry fight, a lot of people, they've seen the movie, and the movie makes it look like it's
there are more dead cavalrymen in the movie than there were here in 1863.
Right, okay.
Let's just leave it at that.
It was just kind of a slow crawl back to McPherson's Ridge of it, right?
Right.
Which, again, was the goal. It wasn't to fight in a pitched battle against the infantry, right? Okay.
I actually did, if I can interject here,
please.
I actually looked at some numbers earlier today trying to get a handle on this. And, we always hear that Buford lost roughly 125 guys out of that force of 2,400. There's actually some pretty significant evidence that at least 40 to 50 of those casualties may have been at the very end of the day. When they're covering the retreat of the First Corps back to Cemetery Hill.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then that really does kind of, really show you how this is not a pitched battle that's going on between Buford's cavalry and the advancing Confederate infantry.
Because the even the Confederate accounts don't really seem to indicate that they thought it was much of anything, right? There wasn't this hot fight or anything like that.
They think it might be state militia.
Right.
Is there a point, though, where they get to the main line of Gamble and Devon, and the fighting does get a little hotter? Or is it because, and this is a part that I'm always, because when you read these books, like there's not a lot of information on Buford's action. And maybe it's because it wasn't that big of a deal. But is there ever a point where it's getting too close for them so that when Reynolds comes up with the infantry, it's kind of just in the nick of time?
I would say, I would say, and we always talk about the ridges west of Gettysburg, and people talk about McPherson's Ridge, and let me make a distinction here, because I refer to two ridges, East McPherson's Ridge, West McPherson's Ridge.
Yes.
West McPherson's Ridge is where the gallant men of Roy Stone's brigade fought, and we'll get into all that later.
Yeah.
But East McPherson's Ridge is where Reynolds Avenue is, and that's probably where things got a little dicey for the cavalry, is when they got back to East McPherson's Ridge. It may not be that it's a pitched battle, as much as if you're one of those cavalrymen, or if you're John Buford, you're looking back over your shoulder and realizing there's only one more ridge behind me before I run out of ridges here, right?
Yeah.
So that could be the biggest concern he's got.
Right.
And he can undoubtedly start seeing gun after gun being placed along Hers Ridge as well.
Right, right. The artillery's starting to move up now on the Confederate side.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So then John Reynolds gets up here with the infantry. Take us through that, somebody. Take your pick, whoever wants to go.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the first infantry, well, first of all, let's talk about where Reynolds is coming from.
Okay.
Closest Union infantry starts out down around Marsh Creek, about 6 miles south of town. And this is elements of the 1st Army Corps, which is Reynolds' Corps. However, he's temporarily in charge of a wing, which constitutes 3 corps. So Abner Doubleday has command of the corps. So somewhere about a mile south of Gettysburg, they're going to be diverted off of the Emmitsburg Road. They're just marching up the Emmitsburg Road. Nobody seemed to think there was going to be a major problem that day. It's kind of a leisurely march until they get to a point where they start hearing the shooting.
Right.
And then right around the Kadoorie Farm, which becomes famous on July the 3rd as being kind of a center point in Pickett's charge, they got off the Emmitsburg Road, marched across country, and headed towards East McPherson's Ridge, where the cavalry is engaged at that point. 1st Brigade to arrive is commanded by Lysander Cutler. They went into action on the north side of the Chambersburg Pike, and then they're followed probably within 20 minutes or so by the Iron Brigade. And they went into action on the south side of the pike.
Most of Cutler's was on the north.
Yeah.
He had 2 regiments.
Yeah, he's got 2 regiments that are kind of in
barn,
this little seam in the Confederate line around the McPherson farm buildings.
Right. And then remember that as the Iron Brigade comes up, their reserve is the 6th Wisconsin. So they're going to be placed back in the swale between the main line and the seminary somewhere. And they will have, what is it, Rich, 20 men from each other regiment?
As the brigade guard.
Yeah, so those men on the front line, those regiments are down 20 additional men each because they are now back with Rufus Dawes in the 6th. As the regimental guards.
Okay.
And Tracy brings up an interesting point here, is because some people bring up, ask, well, why is the 6th Wisconsin being held back? And you actually have to go back 24 hours to understand the logic behind that.
Okay.
Buford's cavalry on the way up to Gettysburg did run into Confederates at Fairfield.
Right.
And one of the things that Reynolds apparently does tell Doubleday as the infantry is deploying is, we got to watch 2 roads here. We got to watch the Chambersburg Pike, and we have to watch the Fairfield Road because they're worried about Confederates possibly coming in on the Fairfield Road. 6th Wisconsin and the Brigade Guard, their job is to guard the Fairfield Road until more troops reach the field.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so are you're saying Brigade Guard, and you also use the word reserve. Is there a difference? Or are you using these words interchangeably, or?
I don't think there's that much difference. The reserve is, if you need them, you're going to have them back there to pull from.
I think by definition, reserve is just anybody you're not engaging, on the front line.
Gotcha.
They're holding them back. The brigade guard's a little bit interesting, and I don't know if this was standard operating procedure in the Army of the Potomac or if this was an Iron Brigade thing, but they do seem to have this I guess, like you said, it's like 20 guys from each regiment who are designated as the brigade guard. For whatever reason. There's a lot of things that were so commonplace to these guys, they never really wrote in detail about them.
Yeah,
and then it really, kind of puzzles us today about the mechanics behind some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But this may have actually just been standard procedure that each brigade had a guard set up.
Sure.
To do
well, you got to
whatever
protect your
needed to be
rear.
done.
Would they be marching when they're on the way here, for example? Would the brigade guard be marching a good distance from the rear of the columns? Is this like a rear guard?
Well,
or is that different?
I don't know that it's significantly behind. I think you want to try to keep them as close as you can, so if you need them, they're there.
Okay.
Yeah, in this case, I do believe when I looking at the order of march that they all were at the rear of the column.
They were or they weren't?
They were at the back of the
They
column.
were, yeah, okay.
Which is why they end up being held back with the 6th Wisconsin, because the 6th Wisconsin was the last regiment
Right.
in the column. But again, just like Tracy said, they're not going to be, 3 or 4 miles down the road. I mean, they're going to be fairly close.
Right. Who are they fighting against on the Confederate side?
Well, initially the brigade commanded by James Archer comes up.
Okay.
And they are going to be pushing forward, and that is men from Tennessee, Alabama, and they are south of the Chambersburg Pike, coming across Willoughby's Run towards the McPherson Barn and Herbst Woods. And north of the Pike will be General Joe Davis's brigade, Mississippi and North Carolina, and he's down a regiment as well. The 11th is left behind, so they won't be full strength when they begin attacking either. They will have first contact with the men of Cutler's brigade north of the Pike, the 56th and the
76th New York.
76th. All I could think of was
and the 147th New York gets in there as well.
147th is down along the Pike, yeah. So as Reynolds' men arrive and Buford's begin to peel off, Devon will continue to move off to the right flank, the Union right flank, to protect those roads. Gamble's going to move on to the left flank around the Fairfield Road or just south of it. And the infantry will start to take over. Buford's cavalry, John Califf, will pull back and be on Seminary Ridge as the 1st Corps artillery comes up under Hall's main battery, and they're going to take their positions north of the Pike. So they're starting to fill in the gaps in a much tighter fashion than the cavalry was able to do.
Sure.
As the Confederates start to make contact.
So what I'll let you guys do now, if you don't mind, is just build the battle from here, and I'll interject with some questions or to clarify or something like that. So just take it from here. Go ahead, Rich.
Well, I think there's two things about this morning phase of the fight that I think are really intriguing. One is the fact that as the battle lines are approaching each other, they're roughly numerically the same.
Okay.
The number of Union troops on the field and the number of Confederate infantry on the field. And I'm talking about infantry here after the cavalry has essentially done their job.
Okay.
But they're offset by a couple hundred yards. So, the end result of this is that on each side of the Pike, you have kind of this separate battle taking place where if you're north of the Pike, the Confederates initially have the upper hand because they're outflanking the Union line.
Yeah.
They're coming around the Union right. And then south of the Pike, it's just the opposite, where the Union force, the Iron Brigade, is outflanking Archer in the woods. So if you were hovering above this in a hot air balloon looking down on it, you'd literally see two separate fights moving, essentially in two different directions.
Right. Kind of like it might have looked like an S.
Yeah, I mean, the Confederates north of the Pike are pushing the Union Army towards town, and on the other side of the road, the Confederates are being pushed back
down the hill
towards Hers Ridge.
Yeah.
And whoever figures out what's going on the other side of the Pike first is going to have a distinct advantage because somebody's flank is just, hanging out in the open there waiting to get hit.
Right. Okay.
Well, and that's where the Confederates, all of a sudden, they do have a bit of an advantage after Cutler's men retreat back to Sheed's Woods, and they are able to turn right, and they see what's going on down at McPherson Barn and Herbst Woods, and they try to turn their tails that way, and then in comes the men that we've already mentioned, the reserves.
6th Wisconsin.
6th Wisconsin. And the 2 New York regiments that just – there's a seam in the Confederate advance. And that gets caused by 2 things. One is the fact that when the Confederates first deployed – and this just kind of makes sense when you're getting out of a column into a line. You're going to try to put the end of your brigade on some sort of a landmark and say, okay, follow this landmark. And the Confederate troops who would have been north of the pike, their right is initially on an unfinished railroad bed. And the troops who are on the south side of the pike, they're going to put the left on the pike. As you get closer to town, though, the railroad bed and the Chambersburg pike start to diverge. So a gap starts to develop. Now, the gap widens because just before you reach west of McPherson's Ridge, if you're coming from the west, there's a quarry. And Archer makes a decision to kind of move a little bit further to the south to go around that quarry. And this allows these 2 New York regiments, the 95th New York and the 84th New York, they're basically sitting there in the gap. So that frees them up to join the 6th Wisconsin and the Brigade Guard in a counterattack towards the Confederate troops north of the pike.
Okay. So in other words, Archer makes a huge gap that they're not needed to the New York regiments aren't needed to cover.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
And it could have been disastrous had there been another brigade coming up the pike, because all of a sudden you have a gap in the Union line there, and they could have been. The New York regiments could have been flanked very easily as they're going towards the northwards, towards the railroad cut.
So much what happens is just pure dumb luck. On the morning of day one, and initially, if you're the Confederates, everything's going according to plan. You're just pushing this annoying cavalry screen out of the way. They're not putting up major resistance, and really by pure dumb luck, the Confederates are largely in between the 2 ridges when the 1st Union infantry reaches the field, so they don't see them coming.
Okay.
So they don't have time to prepare.
Okay.
And it's one of those scenarios where the Confederates are just kind of in an awkward position when these Union counterattacks start to develop, and all of these little things start to add up and end up with the Confederates being outflanked on both sides of the road,
right,
and being forced all the way back to Her Ridge.
At least, well, I would guess maybe the whole of day one seems to me to be more reactions than any overall strategy on either side.
Well, yeah, because there's really no planning going into it at this point, and the Confederates are coming, like Rich said, he thinks there's some type, or they think there's some type of militia here. Well, guess what? That's what they were expecting, and all of a sudden it's a little stiffer competition, right? A little stiffer wall that they're going against here, and so they're bracing themselves for that, and they're probably going in with a little more confidence than they should have, and once they meet that stiffer competition, things take a turn. Psychology
plays a lot in a lot of these things. So
and there's a story. Did it really happen, or is it one of those stories that middle-aged veterans started to talk about 30 years down the road? But there's a story that one of Archer's men, in the McPherson woodlot, or the Herbst woodlot, wherever we're calling it this week, because I know it's on different maps, it's called different things, says when he sees the Iron Brigade coming across the ridge in front of him, this isn't militia.
Right.
It's them damn fellers with the black hats again, right? Because the Iron Brigade was known for wearing the dress hat, the Hardee hat. And this is that moment of realization that, we've found the Army of the Potomac, and unfortunately, when we found the Army of the Potomac, they were at the top of the ridge and we were at the bottom of the ridge, so we've got some problems here.
Got some fighting to do. But how does that fight go in McPherson's Woods in the morning?
Well, Reynolds shows up, and we got away from Reynolds there.
We did. He dies pretty quickly.
He dies pretty quickly. He came up and he places the battery there north of the pike, and he starts placing the troops off to the left there into the woodlot. And as he does receive a fatal wound to the back of the head, which cuts his stint here as field commander pretty short. Mm-hmm. And I think it's always important to mention that the Union here on the first day goes through 7 different field commanders. So until Meade arrives, and he is the 7th. He's the overall commander, but he's not here.
Right.
He can't give orders if he's not here to the men. So they're going through 7 different commanders, and each one has a little bit of time to try to get things together and figure out what's the next step.
Mm-hmm.
So when Reynolds dies, what's Doubleday have to do? He has to figure out what he is going to do next, and he's not in command all that long before Howard comes up. But once Reynolds starts placing the men in and around Herbst Woods, then that's when the Iron Brigade decides this is where we're going to stay. They're going to plant their flag there, and they're going to wait and see what happens, but they are going to be able to stay there and defend that land for several hours.
Okay, so they're going to have those woods for a while now before it gets really hairy.
Yeah, once
Don't they push the Confederates back to Herbst Ridge?
Once the Iron Brigade comes up, we're being there's an airstrike being called in right now. So that's
Getting straight.
In case you're wondering what that noise is. So it's like the 5 o'clock Charlie guy from MASH. Okay, but and again, pure dumb luck. Nobody planned this, but there were 2 Union regiments from the Iron Brigade, 19th Indiana, 24th Michigan, that crossed the ridge just south of where the Confederate line ends. And I don't think anybody, other than maybe the regimental commanders, was aware that, hey, we're in position to flank the enemy. I think this is the regimental commanders realizing as they cross the ridge, there's no Confederates in front of us because we're not getting shot at.
Right.
The units to our right seem to have a pretty nasty fight going on,
Right.
so the end of the line's got to be over there somewhere.
Yeah.
And these guys just pivot 90 degrees and come right in and slam into the Confederate right flank. And this does force Archer's men to withdraw, back to Her Ridge. And I always like to make these points on tours that, especially if we've had folks that have had the opportunity to go through the visitor center and go through the different galleries in the museum.
Sure.
Where we have these, these great little 4-minute videos of each day's battle, and they're very well done animations. This is not lines on a map we're talking about. These are real live human beings. Some poor guy is the end of the line. Right? I mean, if you're that guy, if you're that Alabama soldier who is the right flank of Archer's brigade, the realization you have that the enemy is on your flank is when you get shot at from that direction. Okay, so at this point, you're facing the Union troops in front of you, who you are firing at, who you've essentially stopped. Suddenly, bullets come in from your right. Then bullets start to come in from behind you, because the 24th Michigan does a second wheel and kind of loops around behind the Confederate flank. Okay, if I'm that guy and I'm lucky enough to still be standing, if there's bullets coming at me from 3 directions, I'm going the 4th direction. Okay, right? So he's on the far right. He's running to his left. And then when the guy next to him sees him run past, he's not going to hang around and go, gee, I wonder where he's going. He starts to follow him. And you've got a line that starts to unravel pretty quickly at that point.
Yeah.
And it becomes every man for himself.
Huh. All right. So now... But so they do push them. Does the Iron Brigade at first pursue them across Willoughby Run and up Herbst Ridge a
cross
little
Willoughby
bit?
Run, maybe went another 100 yards or so, maybe 200 yards. And I think that's when they become aware of what Tracy talked about earlier. There's a lot of artillery sitting up in front of them, and at that point,
get the hell out of there.
Pursuit doesn't look like a good idea.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So go ahead. Oh, real quick before we continue to the next part of the battle that you want to talk about, you mentioned before. Reynolds is killed. Doubleday takes command until Howard arrives. I've heard this from a lot of our listeners, and they're confused about how all this worked. So before you mentioned that Reynolds was wing commander. So that means, originally he was corps commander, but he's elevated to wing command, which is a temporary position for him. So somebody needs to take command of his corps.
Yes.
Okay. Explain how this all works then.
So when Reynolds was placed in wing command, Rich alluded to this earlier, Abner Doubleday is ranking officer in the First Corps, so he is a First Corps commander. Okay, so Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, when Reynolds dies, there's no replacement for the wing commander.
Not initially.
Yeah.
Not initially.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Howard's not on the field yet.
That would be Howard later.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So Doubleday's taking over for First Corps commander. Right. And, this is where things on a battlefield can get confusing very quickly because you have to try to relay all of these messages to all of your subsequent commanders. You're now in charge of this, you're now in charge of that. So Thomas Rowley takes over for Doubleday.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
So he would be the ranking division commander.
the ranking division commander would be.
Actually, it would be Wadsworth.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. No.
So Doubleday's got
ranking brigade commander.
Okay.
Forgive me.
At this point, Doubleday still has the Kohr, and since the first Kohr is on the field, when Reynolds goes down, the only difference is you've taken away one layer of command.
Right.
Because Doubleday's still in charge of the Kohr.
Right.
And
okay. So nothing happens. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm skipping ahead.
It's when Howard reaches the field.
Yes.
And he comes up ahead of the 11th Corps, his Corps. He outranks Doubleday based on seniority.
Correct.
Okay. So now he becomes the ranking officer on the field. So he then assumes control of all the troops on the field. Doubleday reverts back to command of the First Corps, and everything else falls into place. Mm-hmm. But now you have to deal with the change of command in the 11th Corps.
Right, yeah.
So when they come up, now Carl Schurz has to come up from division command. You know, a Corps commander gets incapacitated or promoted, and suddenly there's this ripple effect all the way down the chain of command. This is what Tracy was just talking about. You know, somebody has to replace the Corps commander.
Right.
That's a division commander.
Right.
Then the senior brigade commander has to step up and replace that division commander. Now the senior regimental commander has to take over that brigade.
Right.
And now whoever the next in command of that regiment is takes over the regiment.
So this might be why we see colonels in command of brigades sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Matt, it's not as easy as sending a text or an email to somebody saying, hey, you're up to bat. You know? I mean, you have to send a courier. You have to send a messenger to try to find them. And this is, we often talk about the importance of the color guard.
Yep.
We often talk about the importance of the flags to lead the regiment. But it's also important that the commanders have the flag so you can find them.
You should find the commander, yeah.
So that's what these couriers are looking for. They have to try to find each Corps commander's, the flag, their headquarters, wherever they are, so they can say, hey, you're up. And that's what they're going to find with Howard after he arrives on the field, places some men over there on Cemetery Hill and continues into the town. Then they're going to, the story goes, he's up on top of the Fahnestock building, up on the roof up there.
Yeah.
And that's where they track him down. And, hey, you're on. You're up.
Your turn.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's probably one of, either Doubleday or Reynolds staff officers who tracks him down.
Right.
Yeah.
Says Reynolds is down.
Right.
You're in. Howard's arrived on the field like 10 minutes earlier. He's just rode up ahead of his troops, and all of a sudden there's this guy sitting in the middle of the street down below him, going, "Hey, you're in charge."
Yeah. He's like, "Oh, this is a nice town," and then boom. All right. So now that
you know what? Can I just interrupt something? Because this is interesting because we're talking about this. At this point, when Reynolds goes down, he hasn't told anybody what his plan is.
Right.
That's right.
Good point.
And I think Doubleday and Howard both kind of operate off this assumption that, well, he's putting troops west of town, so he wants to fight there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And this then triggers like this tremendous debate that lasts for decades after the battle as to who in the Union Army first went, well, Cemetery Hill is where we really want to fight this thing. Was it Reynolds? Was it Doubleday? Was it Howard? We do know that Reynolds does send a dispatch to Meade, probably one of the last things he did before he was killed, where he talks about trying to, fight as long as possible to keep the Confederates off of the high ground south of town.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I'm about to say here may go counter to what Tracy believes, but that's great, because this is one of the things about being a guide here. There's a lot of interpretation in this. Right?
Sure.
I don't think he's talking about Cemetery Hill.
Ah.
I believe, and I'm going back to the previous day, one of the dispatches that Reynolds sent to Meade on June the 30th talks about high ground south of Gettysburg, but then he's a little bit more specific, and he says, I'm talking about the high ground along Middle Creek.
Oh.
Okay, now that's 6 miles down the road. Reynolds would have seen that ground personally.
Right.
So when he sends that dispatch to Meade on the 1st, it says, I don't want them to get to the high ground south of Gettysburg. Is he talking about a quarter of a mile south of Gettysburg, or is he talking about Middle Creek?
Interesting.
There's a very real possibility that if Reynolds doesn't get killed, he's trying to lure the Confederates down to Middle Creek, where he would have 3 corps of infantry in position on some really great high ground, and try to fight it out there,
So,
not necessarily here in Gettysburg.
let me ask you this. Why then did he get everyone on the road to come to Gettysburg and not like take a third of his corps up here to do the luring and then leave the other two down there and get them into position?
Well, and again, we have to look at the orders of June the 30th and the morning of the 1st. When Reynolds becomes aware that Buford has seen Confederates up here in the Gettysburg area, and he relays this information to Meade, the order from Meade is to bring the First Corps up here to relieve the cavalry so they can go out and search for the Confederates and gather more information. Not necessarily, let's send the First Corps up there because there's going to be a fight there.
Fight, yeah.
And then the 11th Corps is just ordered to move up to supporting distance.
Yes.
The 3rd Corps is still down on below Middle Creek.
Right.
So,
and they're ordered to Emmitsburg, right?
They're ordered to Emmitsburg. Yeah. They come over from Bridgeport to Emmitsburg.
So
and they arrive there, on the 1st.
Okay. So situation changes,
right?
And so therefore, okay, good. All right. So now let's progress the battle along a little bit more. How does the morning end? Where is everybody? What's going on?
Well, like we've been talking about, it depends on what side of the pike you're on,
okay,
north or south. After the Confederates start turning towards the south, and they end up in this desperate fight around the railroad cut. They're jumping down into that cut. Some places only a foot or two high, other places up over their heads. So it's almost like, depending on where you are, it's either a trap or a trench to shoot from. Regardless, the 6th Wisconsin and the 2 New York regiments from McPherson's Ridge head that way and eventually overwhelm the Confederates in that trench, in that railroad cut. Many of them are starting to try to flee out to the west, but there are, Rich, some 300 or so captured?
Yeah, they're taken prisoner.
300, yeah.
They just realize they can't extricate themselves from the cut at the deepest part.
Yeah.
And depending on the time of day in the railroad cut, this is going to repeat itself with Stone's Brigade.
Right.
At least a portion of Stone's Brigade.
Right.
So that's really going to be the end of the fighting on that portion of the field. While that's happening, the Iron Brigade in Herbst Woods are driving the Confederates back. This would be Archer's Brigade back to their starting point on Hers Ridge. So somewhere, what are we guessing? Around 11 o'clock?
I would say around 11 o'clock. The morning fight is pretty much
like
over.
That. Winding down.
Yeah, Confederates who survived the morning fight are back on Hers Ridge. Probably trying to figure out where all these Yankees came from because they certainly didn't expect to run into serious resistance, and they're kind of regrouping up there.
Right,
and it's common phraseology. Is that a word?
Yeah,
phraseology.
Yeah,
it's a common belief that there's all of a sudden a lull in the battle. Everybody's, okay, this wasn't what we were planning on this morning, and okay, we're going to sit. I'm not sure that it's quite as quiet as people are led to believe.
Yeah.
I mean, as Stone's Brigade's coming in to take position around McPherson's farm there, and they're going to be receiving artillery fire. So it might not be rifle fire, but there's some popping of guns going on.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think like people talk about this midday lull.
Right.
That's the phrase that you run into time and time again. The midday lull is, the infantry's not fighting because they've separated. Okay,
right.
Doubleday and Howard have essentially made the decision, okay, we're going to hold this position west of town, let the Confederates come to us. Confederates are reorganizing about a mile west of that. But there's a fair amount of artillery now that's on the field, and the artillery is definitely engaged. Yeah. I mean, you've got probably in the neighborhood of 30 Confederate cannon in action from Her Ridge. You've got maybe about a dozen Union guns at one point or another, engaging those Confederate guns. So, for a couple of hours, probably from about 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, there's not an infantry fight going on, but there's artillery firing.
Right.
And you've got a lot more troops arriving during that period.
Right.
Tracy, alluded to Stone's Brigade. Okay, well, they come up. They're part of the First Corps. Doubleday essentially uses them to plug a gap in his line between Cutler's men, who are over by the railroad cut, and the Iron Brigade, which is in McPherson's Ridge. There's a gap a couple hundred yards wide, so Stone's Brigade, gets stuck into that gap. Then you've got Biddle's Brigade comes up. They're put on the far left. beyond the Iron Brigade. So what had been 2 brigades of infantry is now 4 brigades of infantry. Mm-hmm. And then the 2nd Division comes up under John Robinson. They're held in reserve back at the seminary. So here's where our definition of reserve is. Okay, they're kind of a second line, maybe half a mile behind that forward line. Where are we going to put them? Well, it depends on what starts to happen here. If the Confederates start to get active again, okay, now we've got a reserve that we can move to wherever the threatened point is.
Yeah, and if you can try to keep them centrally located, that's equal distance, whichever direction you have to go where they're needed.
Yeah.
So the seminary at that point was pretty much centered along the First Corps line.
Right, okay.
Right. And I think the biggest point here is that up to this point, everything's been happening west of town. So we talk about all this morning fighting. Everybody in the Union Army is focused on what's coming at them from the west, either on the Chambersburg Pike. And again, they're still worried that there's a potential for a Confederate force to come in from the west on the Fairfield Road.
Yeah.
But the threat that's developing is coming from the north.
That's right.
And this is now, Richard Ewell's Corps beginning to advance, towards Gettysburg. They started out much further away, so it takes them longer to get here. Mm-hmm. And we're sitting on Oak Hill. We're sitting where they deploy.
Yeah.
I mean, literally right here where we are.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that, ladies and gentlemen. We are on the battlefield at Oak Hill. And where we're sitting, too, we can also see the Gettysburg Plain beneath us, which is where the 11th Corps is going to go. And so this is a pretty cool spot up here. It's behind the peace
This is the
light.
high point on day one.
Yeah.
Day one, you don't have the dramatic, vista that you get from Little Round Top or that type of thing. But this is a pretty commanding hillside that we're sitting on right now.
Absolutely.
It's commanding enough. You don't need Little Round Top. It's enough.
This is the Little Round Top of the first day.
Yeah, yeah.
And keep in mind, while this fight that we've been discussing is going on, Buford's cavalrymen under Thomas Devon are still out these roads.
Right.
They're still out here looking. Those vedettes are still out there watching. And they can see this line of gray men coming in. So it's not like when the 11th Corps comes up, all of a sudden they're surprised by these men.
They know they're out there.
They know they're coming in.
Yep. Now, I think what does happen, though, is the Union plan at that point was to use the ground we're sitting on right now to anchor their right flank.
Yes.
Yeah, so get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So what's that?
Well, the Confederates got here first. I mean, again, this is the whole dumb luck thing, right?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Nobody planned this. Nobody in the Confederate command went, aha, there's some high ground. We must go there, right? Okay. I think what essentially has happened here, and you got to kind of read between the lines of some of the battle reports, but the first of Ewell's units that approaches Gettysburg is coming down the Carlisle Road. Okay. And this is the division led by Robert Rhodes. And about a mile north of where we're sitting, the Carlisle Road starts to drop downhill into what Tracy referred to as the Plains of Gettysburg. And if you've ever stood where we are, if you look down here to the north side of town, it's about as flat as it gets. I mean, it looks, it's like pool table flat down there, okay? Yeah. So the way I always visualize this is if I'm Robert Rhodes approaching this battlefield, I've been hearing the morning phase of the fighting. Now, I don't know what's going on out there because I haven't been able to see it yet. I'm not at a point where I can visually see where either line is. But I don't want to march towards a fight at the bottom of the hill.
Right. Okay.
So I think what essentially happens is when he gets to that point where the Carlisle Road starts to drop down into the valley, he gets off the road, starts to move his troops, along the crest of a ridge, and that ridge ends right here where we're sitting on Oak Hill. And what this does is it inadvertently allows him to slip past Buford's cavalry, who's watching the roads, and get here before the Union Army has the numbers to get people up here and anchor their flank.
Okay.
And interestingly, there was a road from right here. I'm pointing folks at the Moses McLean farm, connecting over here to the Samuel Cobean farm.
Yep.
There was a road.
Yeah, right down here. Yeah.
Just on the other side of where the railroad tracks are today.
It's quite possible that some of Rhodes' men actually, the most efficient way to get from point A to point B. That's what you're looking for. And using that lane very well could have been a lot of those men coming in here and coming up onto the north side of Oak Hill where we are.
Now, would the bulk of Rhodes' men have been going on Hers Ridge Road, or what is now? Was that there at the time?
Hers Ridge Road, I believe, is there.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're actually up that far.
Okay.
I think they're more
so further down.
Right, more between where we are and Hers Ridge Road, which is about a mile to the west of us.
Okay, gotcha.
And they'll be coming in facing south. Dole's brigade is going to be on the left. To his right is going to be O'Neill's brigade of Alabamans. And
That's
then,
skirmish fire, in case you're wondering what that noise is in the background.
Yeah, what the hell is it? No, we had an
We have all
automatic
kinds of sound
weapon
effects here tonight. This is great.
So after O'Neill, we have Iverson, and then finally Daniels is anchoring the Confederate right down on the western side of Oak Hill, and behind them, again, here's that word we've been using, the reserves, is going to be Stephen Ramsey coming up in the rear. And realistically, he's coming up in the rear, but there's nowhere to put him up here anyway at this point. One of the first things that the Confederates do when they get here before they deploy all these infantrymen is start placing cannons up here. So now we have the 30 guns over on Hers Ridge from Fairfield Road up to and a little beyond the Chambersburg Pike, and now you're having more batteries up here. And this is going to be hitting the flank of the Union line over on Oak Ridge and clear down to McPherson's Ridge.
Yeah.
11th Corps isn't here yet.
11th Corps is just beginning to
They're
arrive.
Starting to come in.
They're coming through town.
Yes.
So Rhodes gets here first.
Yes.
First enough.
Yep.
But essentially they're coming at the same time, or
He
Pretty
gets here,
close.
he's probably on this hill maybe 20, 30 minutes before the first 11
Okay.
Corps units
Okay.
are
They
breaking
come
down.
out of the north side of town and they say, shucks, we shouldn't have stopped for that bucket of water.
Exactly. It's like the construction on Washington Street slowed them down just long enough that they had to detour around.
They had to
it,
get the parade barriers out of
and
the
lo and
way.
behold,
all right, so
little known factor in the battle. Nobody talks about the construction in town in 1863. But
it was just as bad back then as it is now.
exactly.
So, all right. So Rhodes is getting in position up here a little bit ahead of the 11th Corps. Now, you're saying the 11th Corps, the lead elements arrive maybe 20, 30 minutes after Rhodes gets up here. That's right? You're saying lead elements.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of coming in piecemeal, is
Right,
that correct?
they're actually coming up a couple different roads.
Right.
Because there's a lot of traffic south of Gettysburg at this point. You've
Yeah.
got wagon trains and you've got all sorts of things. So,
In all
part-
seriousness, the town's slowing them down too.
Part of the 11th
You know,
Corps
yeah.
peeled off and moved over towards the 20-town road coming up. Part of them are coming up the Emmitsburg Road.
Right.
So,
And somewhere in all this, Howard says, hey, I'm in charge now.
yeah, because he's here now. And,
So
and
now,
he's the ranking
this
officer on
could
the field.
delay them a certain amount too, because they have to now. Howard has to say, "Okay, Schurz, you're now Corps
Right.
commander," and we have to designate who's taking over for whom, and then from there start deploying your men.
Right.
So okay. So there's a lot of confusion, and but meanwhile, what's Rhodes got his eye on when he's up here?
Well, the first thing that Rhodes is looking at from here is he's more or less looking due south at the Union infantry, the 1st Corps units that fought during the morning.
Because he also knows that Early's coming into
Yeah,
his
Early's
left.
coming in on the Harrisburg Road.
Right.
So
he's not, and he's got some units down.
Yeah,
the
he's
hill.
got some. He's got Dole's brigade down the slope below where we're sitting. He's got skirmishers out there, and here again, you got to read between the lines of Rhodes' report to kind of see how he's visualizing this situation. As Tracy said, what's the first thing the Confederates do? They put artillery up here.
Yeah.
That artillery starts firing. First of all, you could be the worst gunner in Lee's army. You're going to hit something if you're on this hill, okay? Because you're literally firing down the line.
Yeah.
Even if you miss the target, you're hitting somebody behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's what modern military analysts would call a target-rich environment to hear a Confederate gunner up here. There's a lot of Yankees
And the
out
other
there.
thing Rhodes has going for him is most of these trees we see out here on Hers Ridge aren't here.
Right. Yes.
Right.
You see some period photographs. It's very open.
Yeah.
So
He
he can
sees a
see
lot of
those
people.
men over there.
Right.
You can
You
see the
said-
men in gray over
You
there.
mean Oak Ridge?
Yeah, he can.
You
he
said
can
Hers
see,
Ridge.
Right.
Hers Ridge.
Oh, you're talking Hers Ridge.
Yeah, he can see
Okay.
the other Confederate force that was engaged in the morning. He can
Right.
see A.P. Hill's men off to
So
the
he
west.
knows his right is protected.
Sure, he could see basically everything. Because
Right.
Now, how about here, Sheeds Woods? Is it as thick as it looks today?
Scattered trees, but not a lot of undergrowth.
Not the undergrowth, yeah.
Although there is kind of an interesting thing that happens there because when Rhodes opens fire on the Union troops under Cutler's command, who would have been kind of straddling the railroad cut but facing west, they pull back to Sheets Woods for protection.
Mm-hmm.
And when they pull back to Sheets Woods, right about that time, the troops that had been in reserve at the seminary come out of Sheets Woods and start to take position on Oak Ridge, which is right down here below us. When you read Rhodes' report, he seems to imply that he thought they were the same people.
Okay.
You know, he talks about these troops coming out of the woods where he had just seen Union troops retreat to, and he says they're advancing towards me. And I think it starts to play a big role in his thinking when he starts to deploy the infantry. Because he sees the Union troops on Oak Ridge. I believe, this is my own personal opinion, that he thinks there's a gap then in Sheets Woods.
Aha.
And then he can see the bucktails of Stone's brigade, who have turned and are now deploying along the Chambersburg Pike around the McPherson buildings, and the Iron Brigade is beyond them.
Okay.
So when he launches his first attack off of this hill, and it's a 3-brigade front, brigade on the left is Edward O'Neill.
Right.
I think O'Neill's job is to hit the people on Oak Ridge. Brigade on the right is Junius Daniel. He's going to go down and hit Stone.
Uh-huh.
The center brigade is Iverson. He's going to head for the gap. Problem is, there ain't a gap.
They're in a gap, right.
There's a lot of Yankees sitting down there waiting for him.
So Cutler is still in the woods.
He's in the woods.
And the brigade that Rhodes is talking about would be Baxter?
Yep.
And part of Paul, or is it
No,
just
Paul's still down by the seminary. He's going to come up as the fight starts to develop. At this point, it's just Baxter.
So it's just Baxter now.
Right.
So O'Neill goes forward first, right?
Yeah.
And
with only 3 of his 5 regiments.
Okay. Against Baxter.
Right.
And is turned back.
He gets stopped
He
pretty
gets
quickly.
turned back. Now,
And
there are some sharpshooters down here in the barn covering the left because Doles is on down there.
Right,
He's
and those are the first 11th
meet.
Corps units to start to engage because there are some 11th Corps units that are now coming out of town that occupy the McLean Farm, which is
45th New York's coming
right
in,
down
but
the
there's
slope
only,
from us.
4 companies of
Yeah,
them.
they're
not a big
right.
Full strength.
The Baxter's brigade is still the first corps.
Yep.
So, but the 11th Corps is going to start to file into their right.
Exactly.
Right. They never do quite make that connection.
Right.
They're hoping.
But they're going to try to.
They're going to
try to, but there's definitely going to be a gap here. And it's interesting because O'Neill's an interesting, here's a colonel commanding a brigade.
Colonel, yes.
Yeah.
He's been recommended to be promoted to brigadier general. After Gettysburg, Lee pulls the promotion. It's the only time I know of in the entire war where Lee halted a promotion that was in progress. And I think it's because of O'Neill's performance here. Not only does he only send 3 of his 5 regiments into the fight, but he stays back with the 2 that didn't advance.
Oh.
So this is part of the problem that O'Neill's guys are going to run into.
Yeah, it's just piecemeal. It's just piecemeal up here.
And I think this creates all kinds of problems for Iverson. Because not only is Iverson heading now for a non-existent gap, but the Union troops who are going to hit him on his left flank, he thinks O'Neill's going to deal with them.
Yeah, they're not occupied
and
anymore.
O'Neill's not there.
So he has no idea about it.
Yeah. Iverson becomes the scapegoat for this, and I think Iverson becomes a scapegoat to some extent unfairly.
Yeah, that's I think you make a good case for that. So Iverson is next in line then.
Right.
And he's going to go for that non-existent gap.
Yep.
And what happens to him?
He's in a crossfire. He gets hit from the left by Baxter's people who are now shifting to deal with him because they've already stopped O'Neill. Part of Paul is now arriving on the scene. His brigade is coming down from the seminary, and you've got Cutler's guys in the woods.
And the 143rd says they're shooting at him from
They
Stone's
did.
brigade.
The 143rd, Stone's brigade fired at them
They're
at a
shooting
range of
Iverson's
900
flank.
yards.
Yeah, they're shooting at Iverson's
Yeah,
flank.
and actually,
Wow.
if you read Roy Stone's report, he said that firing at them from 900 yards is what stopped them.
So
this is the classic battle report. This is this is the everyone advances with alacrity and retires in good order battle reports. Forget about the guys that are shooting at them from 50 yards away. My guys 900 yards away, stop them.
Yeah. So Iverson is aware that Baxter's brigade is down on the other side of
Yeah,
that,
I think he is.
right?
I don't think it's a surprise there's people there. I think it's a surprise that nobody's keeping them occupied.
Right.
Okay. All right. So Iverson gets hit in the left. Oh, thank you, Jeff. How bad is he hit? What happens to him?
Who was that? Iverson.
Iverson. Yeah.
I was busy watching you get a key.
Jeff just Jeff Caravella.
Yeah, we're sitting here watching how the sausage is made, folks, and it's really
It's quite disgusting.
Iverson's men are marching in fairly good order across these open fields here, more or less to the southeast. And when Baxter's men all of a sudden aren't busy, they turn around and shift and begin firing, almost point-blank range at, what was it, 75 yards, 100 yards, something like that, right in the open. And
was it the 5th North Carolina they hit? Who was it they hit?
I think the 5th is on the left.
On the left,
Although
yeah.
the 5th, I think, realizes there's a problem because they do start to pull back a little bit. When you look at the regimental casualties in Iverson's brigade, it's actually the 2 regiments in the center of the 4-regiment line that take the hardest hit.
Okay.
Close to 70% casualties. And the 5th, I think, takes about, probably about 60%.
Yeah. But they're more or less stopped in their tracks.
Yeah.
And it's not just Baxter. It's, like Rich said, I mean, it's the remnants of Cutler firing into them and, maybe 1 or 2 bullets from Stone's brigade.
Although Stone's about to have his hands full with Junius Daniel because Daniel's getting down to that area.
So while that's going on, while Iverson's moving, Daniels is over here. Junius Daniel with his North Carolina brigade, and isn't he the largest brigade in the Confederate Army?
Yeah, big
right?
brigade.
Yeah,
5 regiments and good-sized regiments because they haven't they're fairly new to Lee's Army, at least now. They had been with Lee's Army in '62 and then were detached, and now they're back.
And they're the only one with the new flag.
They're the only one with the new flag,
with the stainless banner.
Oh, yep, that's 32nd North
interesting.
Carolina.
Yeah. Yep. So they start sweeping down southward, and they're going piecemeal too.
Yeah.
They have just 5 regiments, right? But only 3 of them ended up heading towards
the woods.
Right.
Yeah.
Three of them end up tangling with Stone's brigade down by the railroad cut and down by the Chambersburg Pike. 2 get shifted over to try to cover Iverson, who's in trouble.
Right.
Okay.
If I can, there's another interesting point while all this is going on, and Tracy just mentioned it a moment ago. If I'm Robert Rhodes standing on this hill, if I'm Richard Ewell standing on this hill, I can see other Confederates off to my west.
Right.
But they're not moving. They're not advancing at this point. So, again, I think, people criticize Ewell and say, oh, this guy's cautious. He's no Jackson. He did exactly what Jackson would have done if Jackson was standing on this hill on July the 1st, 1863.
Just go right in?
He went right in.
Yeah.
And I think he fully expects A.P. Hill to come in from the west and support him, and they're going to crush this smaller Union force. But Hill doesn't advance.
Right.
So now you've got all these troops that were facing west are suddenly turning and face north to deal with Ewell's assault because nobody's coming in from the west to keep them busy.
Let's just jump over to Hersridge for a moment, and then we'll come back here. You mentioned A.P. Hill. Is he on the field at this point?
That's a good question, and I don't think anybody really knows the answer.
No.
Okay.
No. But you know who is coming onto the field pretty quickly?
That's my next question.
Lee.
Robert Edward Lee is finally going to be arriving, and he's scratching his head saying, what the heck's going on?
And Hill probably arrived with Lee. That's kind of the sense I get.
Right.
Lee had encountered Hill at Cashtown.
I don't know. In the movie, Hill's just pulling his britches up at the Cashtown Inn when Lee passes.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. And Lee talks to Heath and says, what the hell happened?
Yeah. And this could very well be why the Confederates didn't advance from the west.
Because
they're waiting for direction from above.
Okay.
They stumbled into something here they weren't prepared for, and then they pulled back and they had a break there. Let's keep them occupied with some artillery, but we better wait around a little bit.
Well,
Henry Heath is infamous for starting the famous shoe story.
Right.
Yes.
Right, when he writes his memoirs. I think he started telling people the shoe story at
Immediately.
roughly 11 a.m. on July the 1st, 1863.
Yeah.
I think when he's sitting on Hers Ridge after they got pushed back, he's calling his officers together and going, hey, when Lee gets here, if anybody asks, we're looking for shoes. Everybody got that? Okay. We're all on the same page, right?
No, it's a good point. And then also, is Pender up yet?
Pender's behind Heath.
Behind Heath.
Yeah.
So you've got 2 divisions, but no corps commander, no overall commander for them yet until Lee gets on the field, supposedly. But we don't really know for sure where Hill is.
I think Hill comes in with Lee.
Yeah.
He comes in with Lee.
That's my feeling. But
it would make sense that they rode up from Cashtown together.
So the problem here is you've got a lot of Confederate troops, but unlike the Union situation, where we always have someone in charge
Right.
of the entire force on the field.
Yeah.
Maybe not for very long.
Maybe not for very long, but at one point or another, there's a ranking officer who's calling the shots.
Right.
You don't have that on the Confederate side, really, until Lee reaches the field.
Right. Right.
Okay.
You know, we've got different commanders doing different things.
When Ewell gets here, he doesn't send over their orders to Hill's men to attack with them.
Right, because he's the ranking officer when he gets here.
He would be.
Yeah.
He would be, but
he doesn't.
how long is it going to take to send a courier from where we're sitting over there, and then Hill has a question, and the courier has to come back.
Right.
I think Ewell saw an opportunity and just
go.
kind of operated under the assumption that if I can see him, he can see me.
Right.
If I advance, he's coming with me.
And he wouldn't know that Hill is not there.
Precisely.
So, but he knows that's Hill's troops.
Yep.
And they were all under Jackson with him.
Yep.
And so they would think, well, if they see me going in like Jackson would have done, then maybe they'll get the clue and come in with me.
Well, Ewell very well could have been up here saying, hey, tell me I'm slow. I'll show you.
It could be. I mean, Ewell's done pretty well during the campaign. Dealing with militia and the scattered units, and even dealing with what happened. Man, this is just intriguing out here, isn't it?
I know. This area, this whole area used to be nice and quiet.
I know. That was. I don't know what that noise was. Okay, but
Jeff had Mexican.
But anyway.
But while all this we're talking about's going on, who else is coming in? Early's coming in from the northeast now.
Yeah.
Early's going to start arriving, and by this time, we have two divisions of 11th Corps down here.
Yeah, because they're now coming out of town, and they're deploying at roughly right angles to the 1st Corps.
Yes.
So they're facing north. The 1st Corps is facing west. Rhodes' first attack gets knocked back on its heels because he loses probably close to 40, 45, maybe 50% of the men that were engaged. But like you said, Early's coming down the Harrisburg Road, so he's about to threaten the 11th Corps' right flank.
And Early is going to be pretty aggressive himself over there. He's going to send Gordon out. And, Dole's brigade is already moving down across this plain.
And for my money, they're one of the most underrated brigades in the Confederate
I
Army,
think so.
especially on day one. Doles does a phenomenal job of moving his units around, dealing with the situation as it evolves.
Yep.
Doesn't get a whole lot of attention for what he's doing. But,
So what does he do? Let's give him some attention. What does he do?
Well, initially he's sent out just to keep the 11th Corps busy until Early reaches the field.
And he's where is he exactly? Like
He
along
would
the
be-
Carlisle Road?
Yeah, he's more stretching down across the Carlisle Road.
Okay.
Well, we can see Barlow's Knoll right
Yes.
over there where the flagpole is. So he's not that far.
He's not that far.
Right.
That's going to be Gordon and
That's going to be
Hayes and
Gordon
Avery.
coming in from
So
that
he's
direction.
just shy of that.
He's
Yes.
coming right in through.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as the fight develops, and since we're talking about Barlow's Knoll, I guess we got to talk about Barlow.
We probably should.
Yeah. The
Channing?
11th Corps wasn't supposed to be
Channing,
out that
Channing.
far. Yeah. The 11th Corps is supposed to be at almost right angles to the 1st Corps, but when you look at the positions on a map as Early approaches the field, it's more of a very broad letter V.
Yeah.
And this is because Barlow sees some slightly higher ground in front of his assigned position, moves forward to it, which is what's today referred to as Barlow's Knoll, and kind of forces the entire 11th Corps to shift from their original line to a line that's roughly 45 degrees to that original line.
He pulls the sickles.
He pulls the sickles
before
on a smaller
Sickles
scale.
Pulled the sickles.
It's very similar.
Yeah.
I love Barlow's statue, incidentally. If anybody visits Gettysburg, if you go over to Barlow's Knoll, his statue pretty much tells you the entire story because he's looking the wrong way. He's not facing where the problem is coming from. Okay?
Right. Yeah, I go to his statue and I just stand there and look at him and I go, who do you think you are?
But the thing is, this guy's going to become a great division commander in 1864.
yeah.
He's going to hook up with
But
Hancock.
he's just not there yet.
I don't like him now. I don't like him in 1863.
He's not a great division commander in 63, but he will be in 64.
Honestly, I wouldn't have liked him ever because of his name. But we don't need to get into that. All right. So Doles is he's engaging
He'll be engaging
11th Corps.
the 11th Corps. Early comes in and sends Gordon's Georgians in. They're
to the
also
left of Doles.
Yep.
to the left of Doles, with just behind them on a slight rise on the other side of the Harrisburg Road is going to be Hillary Jones' battalion of artillery.
Yeah.
So they are going to start shelling Barlow's men as well. And
Now he's got one battery up there.
who, Barlow?
Barlow.
Wilkeson.
Wilkeson.
Yeah, Wilkeson. I couldn't think of his name.
Yeah, he's got Wilkeson on Barlow's Knoll, and he's got 2 other batteries kind of down here in the fields between us and the town of Gettysburg, which are firing more towards this hill.
Wheeler and Dilger are down there.
Exactly.
Okay, so Gordon to the left of Doles.
Yep.
Hillary
Coming in
Jones.
behind Gordon will be Hayes with now keep in mind Devon has pulled back just like Gamble is on the left side of the 1st Corps. Devon is going to be on the right side of the 11th Corps, kind of watching the flanks.
Now, you mentioned Devon pulling back. Does he ever have any, or his men, do they ever have any, exchange any fire with the approaching
there's an argument
Confederates?
about who
There is an argument about
and
there is some argument, but there's an argument that some of Devon's guys may have actually fired the first shot
The 9th
north of
New
town
York?
early that morning when they encountered some stray Confederate cavalry.
Yeah.
But in the afternoon, I don't believe that he engages early, and I think and this may be where we can give Barlow not necessarily a pass. I'm not going to say, oh, okay, he didn't screw up. He did. But I think to some extent, I think the reason that he thought that he might be able to move his troops up to the knoll and not have them across the Harrisburg Road, which is what he's supposed to do, is because he's got Devon on the Harrisburg Road. But Devon gets hit by friendly fire from Union artillery on Cemetery Hill.
Yeah.
Howard at this point is already starting to put some troops in reserve on Cemetery Hill. So he's now thinking, okay, this is going to be our fallback position. And he's got a couple of artillery batteries up there, and he's also got a couple of brigades of infantry. And apparently one of those artillery batteries saw Devon, that's Wiedrich's battery, thought it was Confederate troops, lobbed a couple of shells out there, and forced Devon to move further to the east over to the York Road. And this kind of opens up the Harrisburg Road for Early's troops as they come down the road.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. All right, so Early's troops are coming back down. Sorry.
Right. So Early's now threatening the right flank of the Union line on Barlow's Knoll. Doles is moving regiments around because there's other troops that are moving out to try to reinforce Barlow. Doles is kind of shifting regiments around to deal with them. At the same time, Rhodes is now about to launch another attack from here with Ramseur's brigade, which is the reserve brigade, which has now moved forward. And I think at this point, Lee is on the field going, okay, well, we got him. I got to get Hill back into this.
Yeah.
So now we see Henry Heath with Pender coming up behind him, coming from the west. Now the numbers are starting to shift in favor of the Confederates just because everybody on the field is getting into the act.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Archer and Davis won't be too much involved with attacks anymore, but now you're getting the other 2 regiments from Heath's brigade, Heath's division coming in. Pettigrew and Brockenbrough will be coming in, supported behind them by Pender. So as the Union reinforcements are aligning, Lee has renewed the attack from the west. And sometime mid-afternoon, now the Yankees are being hit from 3 sides. They're being hit from the west and the northeast and the north. So they're being, this is almost like a miniature fishhook, I guess.
Except the Confederates have the numbers to outflank both ends.
They have the numbers now that they won't for the rest of the battle.
And both flanks are essentially in the air.
Yes.
They're not anchored on high ground.
Yes.
So they're vulnerable.
So Barlow, how big is his division? How many men does he have?
I'm not sure.
Geez, I'm going to say maybe 2,500 guys.
Small.
I'd have to look at the
That's my
ORs.
point. Is
it's
small.
a relatively small division.
Yeah. How about Early's division? How big is that?
He's got 4 brigades. One brigade is relatively small, which is extra Billy Smith. They're being held back, but the 3 brigades that are advancing are pretty sizable brigades. So he's he's basically overlapping the end of Barlow by 2 full brigades.
And Early's got a reputation too. Those men, the Louisiana Tigers.
Yeah.
You just mentioned that name and women faint.
Quite literally. What did you say? 4,000, maybe 4,500.
Mike's looking it up.
Let's see what Mike. I'm going to say. I think you're right. 2,500 for Barlow, and I'm going to say about 4,000 to 5,000. I'm going to say 4,500 for Early.
And of course, Doles is getting into the act here as well.
Yeah.
He's advancing towards 11th Corps units, and not all the 11th Corps units have come up online. Barlow moves his troops forward. The rest of the 11th Corps is still shifting to try to reestablish contact with him when he gets overwhelmed.
Right.
So, again, this is where the nice, neat, orderly lines on the map versus reality are two very different things.
Sure.
So Barlow gets defeated before the 11th Corps can come to his aid.
Yeah. And by this time, here on Oak Ridge, 54.
54.
Barlow.
Early's division. Now, take extra Billy out of the mix, which is about 1,200 guys. So you're talking about 4,200 troops that are...
Close.
Say what there, Mikey, louder. About 2,500 for Barlow.
2,500 for Barlow. Okay.
2481. That was close.
All right. Good. All right.
And while this is going on, Baxter's running low on ammunition.
Yep.
So now Paul is drawn up from the seminary.
Okay. Baxter, let's just get everybody back. It's by the observation tower on
First
Oak
Corps,
Ridge.
Oak Ridge.
First Corps.
Yeah.
Far right brigade of the First Corps.
Yep.
And, okay, so now Paul comes up. Go ahead.
Baxter is pulling back into the woods. I don't know that he's ever going to entirely leave, is he? But Paul is going to more or less take over the position that Baxter had.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's got to be some intermingling of units here.
Yeah.
As one brigade is replacing another, and this gets a little confusing.
Isn't there a point where I think Baxter's brigade is split up with Paul's regiments in the middle, or the other way around, or something like that?
There's one regiment. I was going through the order of battle, and we were talking about, okay, this guy's commanding a division, and then this guy's commanding, the division, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
And if you look at Paul's brigade, I think they had 6 different commanders on July the 1st. Okay, and at one point you have one regiment gets transferred from Baxter to Paul, which I think is the 11th Pennsylvania.
Okay, 11th Pennsylvania,
from one brigade to another. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion.
There's a lot
down
of
there, I
a
think,
mess
at that
there.
point.
What happens to Paul?
He gets shot right behind the eyes.
Yeah.
Bullet goes, essentially cuts the optic nerve on both eyes.
Blind
He's
for
blind
life.
for life. There's some really...
He never saw it coming.
Yeah, exactly. I just set him up and you just knock him out of the plane.
There's something about dad jokes.
Exactly.
I love them. All right. So where are we going from here then?
Yeah, exactly. You've got a lot of people, Union line is starting to unravel at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think it's a lot of units are getting pushed back simultaneously. I think the 11th Corps starts to fall apart. I mean, they really don't have a great position. It's flat. It's open. They're being overwhelmed.
Terrible
defeated,
position. Yeah.
Piecemeal. Yeah. So they're being pushed towards town.
So, in your opinion, the 11th Corps breaks first?
No, I think they broke simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
I really believe
okay.
that, and I'm basing this largely on a letter written by the commander of the 107th Pennsylvania, which is one of the units down here on Oak Ridge, and he says they started to retreat when we started to retreat in this letter, which is written shortly after the battle.
Yeah.
And I think at roughly the same time, a mile south of there, the Confederates under Pettigrew's command, part of Henry Heath's division, are overlapping the extreme left flank of the Union First Corps, and they're now starting to get pushed back. Mm-hmm. So,
you have to remember, from where we're sitting right now, it's just one big ring of fire that we can see out there. And while this is going on with Barlow and Doles and Gordon and everyone up here on Oak Hill, a mile to a mile and a half south of us, it's just as fierce fighting down there.
See, I think sometimes we have a tendency to kind of look at these as individual incidents.
Right.
But they're part of the bigger whole.
We get so used to reading books chapter by chapter where each chapter is devoted to a particular action. Right. But everything's going on at one time.
Right. So, we can talk about, Stone's Brigade is holding their position as Brockenbrough advances. To their left, the Iron Brigade is holding their ground against Pettigrew. And, we have this epic fight between the 24th Michigan and the 26th North Carolina. Mm-hmm. But at the same time that's going on, maybe 200 yards from there, other Union troops are in serious trouble, and they're being pushed back.
Yeah, right.
And, of course, now you have the ripple effect. Okay, if the regiments on the left get pushed back, the regiments to their right are now in a crossfire.
And, Matt, it's important to understand that your regiment never breaks first. It's always the regiment to the right or left.
Yes,
that's right,
yes,
exactly. Exactly.
That's a good point.
I'm pretty sure, reading the reports of Stone's Brigade, that if the Iron Brigade had not fallen back, they would still be out there 160 years.
Well, Junius Daniels making attack after attack against the Stone's Brigade.
Yeah.
and they hold off, and they're going to have their own fight at the Western Railroad cut. Where some of those men are now, the tables have turned from several hours
we talked
before.
about this last year when we did the Stone
Yeah,
Brigade episode.
that's right.
Yeah, so
But
they're going to get captured in that railroad cut, just like the Mississippi men did a few hours before at the next railroad cut over.
That's just for people. We skip back in time a little bit. This is before the lines break.
Earlier when
Yeah.
Rose makes his first attack.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, when these Civil War soldiers, when these guys write about Civil War combat, they're writing about what they can see.
Yes.
Right.
Which is typically a 50-yard radius of wherever they happen to be standing at the time.
Unless you're Frank Haskell.
Unless you're Frank Haskell, who sees the entire battlefield with a crystal. Yes, that's true.
He knows it all.
I'm still looking for that spot where he was standing, where he can literally see everything that's happening.
Well, I think he was on the Ziegler Grove Tower.
I think he was.
He must have been.
I think he was in the balloon that they had at the Heritage Center a couple years ago, because that would be the only place where he could see what he claims to see. But yes, so again, and nobody's checking their watches.
Right.
Yeah.
So establishing a hard and fast timeline is extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
But a lot of these things are happening simultaneously.
They're not writing it as it's happening.
No.
Right.
No.
If you're lucky, they're writing it that night, but more likely they're writing it years or weeks or months or years later.
That's
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And some of the First Corps units, like the Iron Brigade, like Stone's Brigade, like Biddle's Brigade, they do have a fallback position. They're going to get outflanked from East McPherson's Ridge, but then they fall back to the seminary.
Right.
They hold there for a while. They get outflanked again.
They don't have that out here on the plain.
No, these guys
The
have
11th
nothing
Corps.
behind them.
No.
They just got a lot of
They
flat
have the
ground behind
town.
them.
Right.
Yep. If you're in the 11th Corps, there's no fallback position until you get to Cemetery Hill.
Yeah. So
They're going to try to make one.
Right.
They're going to try to make one when Coster's men come down off of the Cemetery Hill to the north side of town, along with Heckman's Battery.
Right. Although those guys had to know that this is not a good mission,
No.
because if you're going one direction and everyone else is going the other direction, the odds are very good that what's about to happen is not going to end well.
Yeah.
that's a good point. So tell us about the 16th Maine.
16th Maine is going to be once the right flank of the First Corps begins to collapse. Once that starts to unravel under just sheer strength of numbers of Confederates. And this is great, Matt, because I'm looking straight down the road at it.
Yeah.
I can see the marker for it down there. Essentially, the First Corps or Robinson's men have to get out of there, and they call upon the 16th Maine almost sacrificially.
Yeah.
Just like Rich said about Coster's men coming down, everybody else is running back. Well, the 16th Maine, they knew what this meant to them. They were put there against thousands of Confederates who now are eyeballing right at them, or they're aiming right at them.
They're covering the retreat of everybody else.
Covering the retreat, yeah, absolutely. Buy us time to get the rest of the men off the field, even if it means losing everybody.
How many are they?
232, I believe.
I was going to say
something like that.
216, but 232
Against how many?
Probably a couple thousand.
Yeah.
Right.
That's crazy.
And the thing is, by now the 11th Corps is off of their right.
Yes.
So you have men in the plains coming down here too, looking up the hill at the 16th as well.
So you're getting it from everywhere.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And really, about the best they can do is just kind of is delay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buy time,
They're
slowly fall
distracting
back.
them.
Now, here's an interesting point, because we have to look at how the First Corps units got out here. They didn't come through town. They're not familiar with the street pattern of Gettysburg. They don't know the grid. And when the 16th Maine does fall back from this, suicide mission essentially to cover the retreat, they're falling back towards the seminary. Because
They're falling the ridge.
Yeah, that's where they originally deployed. So they're falling back to that original position, and I'm sure they're assuming everybody else is going to be there waiting for us.
Right.
And they're not. They
not
don't
there.
know that the First Corps units had been pushed back to the seminary, have been dislodged from there, and that's why they get cut off at the third railroad cut,
The third,
the Seminary
eastern,
Ridge cut.
yeah. And by this
That's a great-
time,
yeah.
they realize they're going to be overwhelmed. And what's one of the things you don't want to happen in your regiment? You don't want to
Panic.
lose the colors.
Oh, lose the colors. Yeah.
Yeah, so they tear the colors from the staff, and they shred it into pieces and give to each.
Give it to the men.
Give it to the men. Give it to the men. Better to tear it up and hide it than to have it taken and be disgraced by that.
How many show up the next morning?
You got the numbers, Mike?
Yeah.
It's like 38, I think.
It's not many.
I think it's 34, 38, something like that.
Yeah, the official order of battle here says that they lost 232 men out of 298 engaged.
Okay, that's where I got the 232. I think it was a 232.
Yeah, there you go. So that's crazy.
Yeah. So by this time, the entire Union line is pulling back.
Yeah. Okay, so they're pulling back.
Now here's
and by the way, all those 232 are probably mostly captured. Would you say?
A lot captured.
I would say so, yeah.
If you look at the monuments down here for Baxter and Paul, a lot of those guys are listed as missing. When you look at the casualty figures on the individual regimental monuments, there's a lot that are listed as missing because a lot of those guys get cut off during the course of the retreat.
Yeah.
Because they're literally, they described it, running the gauntlet.
Right.
You've got Confederates coming around both flanks. They're pulling back now towards town, and the pincer is closing behind them. And a lot of those guys never make it back through town.
That's got to be terrifying.
Yeah. Now, is interesting. I said earlier, it's very rare to have a timeline.
Uh-huh.
But one of the guys in the 143rd Pennsylvania, Avery Harris, or excuse me, it's not Avery Harris, I think. I think it's actually a guy in the 88th Pennsylvania, Samuel Boone, says that when they started to retreat into town, the courthouse clock is chiming 5 p.m. Was that Harris? Do you remember, Eric? Or was it Boone? It's one of those guys who mentions that. Those are the two best accounts I've ever seen of the Union retreat through town is from those two soldiers. And one of them says the courthouse clock is chiming 5 p.m. as they begin to withdraw into town.
It's amazing that he had the wherewithal to pay attention to that in that moment of terror.
Guys notice weird stuff. Like little weird details stick out, right?
We do. Well, that's what Veronica was saying one time is we remember the weather on a certain day.
Yeah.
And she's like, was that what it was? Weather? Movie lines, weather.
Yeah.
Our mother's
names. For some reason, that's stuck in this guy's mind that as we're retreating into town, there's the clock starting to chime 5 p.m.
That's funny. We do pay attention to odd details like that. All right, so they retreat through the town. Any highlights you want to add about the retreat itself?
Well, it depends on who you ask about what it was like. The Confederates say it'll be a rout, and the men are just running pell-mell through the town, and the Yankees will say, well, it was an orderly retreat. And
what do the civilians
say? Stayed to one side of the road, and the 11th
civilians
Corps.
say there were a lot of people running past our windows.
Yeah, okay.
We could see a lot of feet from the cellar.
Then they're moving very quickly.
One of the most honest assessments I've ever seen of the retreat comes from a guy in the 150th Pennsylvania. I keep going back to Stone's Brigade for some inexplicable reason here, okay? But
because you like him.
and this is William Ramsey, and he says that the retreat started orderly when they fell back past the seminary. He said as soon as they got into town, the wheels came off.
Okay.
Because now you're all being funneled into these very narrow streets.
Sure.
And he said this is when it just became kind of every man for
Feel
himself.
trapped and
right. Now all these all these First Corps guys still don't know that they're pulling back to Cemetery Hill.
Right.
They're actually heading east.
Okay.
And then
sense.
they see the 11th Corps coming past them in front of them from left to right, and they figure, well, okay, if they're going that way, we should probably go in the same direction.
Right. Okay.
And
man, that had to be a mess.
Yeah, and several First Corps soldiers mention the fact that they don't even know Cemetery Hill exists until they clear the southern edge of town and go, hey, there's a hill.
Right.
And there's people up there.
Because they turned off from the
At
battlefield. They never went up over the hill to get to the battlefield.
Right.
The 11th Corps did.
They went,
Yeah.
So the 11th Corps knows it's there.
And going back to your favorite 149th Pennsylvania, they were some of the last to leave Company D or K.
Company D, which is Doubleday's headquarters guard, are the last organized units to pull back from the seminary.
Yeah.
So
now, what's covering the retreat, though, is several regiments of Gamble's cavalry that's sitting along the stone wall in Schultz's woods, and this is what I was talking a little bit about earlier. They get into a little bit of a fight with some of the Confederate units, and they're holding that position to kind of keep the retreat open, so the Confederates can't sweep around to the south of Gettysburg and get between these retreating infantry units and Cemetery Hill. And when you look at the regiments that were involved in that part of the fight, and you'll have to forgive me here because I actually wrote this down when I was looking at this earlier, they suffer the highest losses of anybody in Buford's command. And it's the 3rd Indiana, 12th Illinois, and 8th New York, and they suffered a combined losses of 92 guys.
Huh.
And I think a lot of that is probably during the afternoon fight.
So that's like the most of
Yeah.
his losses,
Yeah.
Buford's losses,
could very
are
well be at the end of the day. You know, everybody focuses on the cavalry in the first 2 hours of the fight. They do a. They're the rear guard.
Yeah.
When the line comes apart at the end of the day.
And then where's Devon? He's over
Devon's
to the
east of
east.
town.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So
And they'll eventually reunite down around the peach orchard
I bet it felt so good.
to get back together.
Reunited, and it feels so good. All right. So what happens then at the end of the day? They're through the town. The retreat is over. They're rallying on Cemetery Hill.
Right.
The Union is.
The
yes.
Union is. What's going on within the Union Army? Who's putting it all together? And then what's also going on the Confederate side of things?
Well, Hancock is now here.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Winnie
now he's
boy.
around. He's been sent here by Meade. You know, of course, Meade's receiving messages throughout the day of this fight that's developing here. When he hears that Reynolds is killed, he sends Hancock up to the field to kind of take command of the situation. In my opinion, primarily because Hancock was the only Corps commander.
He's the only one around.
He was the closest one.
And he's the only one that he had face-to-face with
Right.
at any time on July the 1st.
But does he know him as? He had a good reputation as a division commander.
Well, these
didn't he?
guys kind of came up together.
Yeah, so they know each other.
Yeah, I think the three guys that were, or the two officers that were closest to Meade are Hancock and Reynolds.
And yeah, one of them's
Well,
dead.
Reynolds is down, so now Hancock is right here. So
Right.
you go up to the field and take command of the situation.
Does Howard have a problem with that?
Howard has a problem with that.
Yeah.
Howard
does
has-
he have a problem with that on the spot, or is this in retrospect?
I think in retrospect. I mean,
Okay.
it seems as though on the spot they kind of divvy up the responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, Howard never really admits that Hancock exercised control. He's going to continue arguing about this, for the rest of his life.
What does Hancock say?
Hancock kind of. He doesn't engage Howard quite as much, but he does on periodically talk about, I had command at the end of the day.
Right.
Okay. But it looks like, Howard takes one area, Hancock takes another, and they go to work together, rallying troops, and just, they're not worried anymore about 1st Corps units, 11th Corps units. They're just worried about bodies.
Just putting it all together.
And, so they're putting troops in the area what's now the National Cemetery. They're putting troops on East Cemetery Hill. Hancock does order the Iron Brigade, or what's left of it, to extend the line towards Culp's Hill. And
Probably
then you have-
close to 40 guns up there by the end of the day.
Yeah, you've got a lot of artillery on Cemetery Hill. Yeah, you've got.
Now, we might imagine that as they're putting everything together, that there's a complete lull. But again, is this like earlier with the afternoon lull, where it's just infantry? Is the artillery?
There's artillery firing on both sides, I'd say, at this point. There's probably some skirmishing going on as the Confederates are continuing to move through town. Of course, they're picking up prisoners.
Yeah.
There's little firefights breaking out in the town where there's small groups of Union troops that have been, cut off or isolated, or they're coming down one street and Confederates come down a side street at a 90-degree angle, and you get to the intersection, there's a firefight developing. Is it 45th New York? I'm drawing Hirsch. Captain Hirsch of the 45th New York has organized some resistance on Chambersburg Street with some Union troops that have gotten isolated there. He's going to end up being awarded the Medal of Honor for that.
Were they they were Coster's reserves? Is that part of Coster's brigade?
45th?
Yeah.
No, 45th was out here fighting.
Right down the slope from where we're sitting.
Okay, they only have
Lane
4
Farm.
companies.
Who am
here,
I
think.
thinking of?
You're thinking of the there's the 27th Pennsylvania,
73rd.
73rd.
Yeah, they were
Yes.
left back around the train station somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So-
And did they put up a little bit of a fight too?
Put up a little bit of fight. I mean,
Yeah.
we sometimes say, well, there's not much fighting in town, and there's not. It's not Stalingrad. Okay,
Right.
This isn't house by house, fighting. Okay,
Yeah.
Union troops are trying to get to the high ground south of town,
Yes.
Yeah.
but there's still little firefights breaking out. And of course, as these Union troops come straggling out of town, they're getting reorganized. They're you may not know where your regiment is, where your company is, but you're going to fall in with these guys over here.
Yeah, they're
And
wearing the same color.
at the same time, the Union is arriving on the hill, getting reorganized. The Confederates are getting more disorganized in the town.
Yeah.
Down the different streets and alleys, and all of a sudden, it's like a dog chasing something, all of a sudden squirrel. Well, look, food on the table.
Yeah, and somebody has to deal with these prisoners.
True.
You got to round these guys up. You got to disarm them. You got to get them away from where the firing is going on.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is all, these are all issues the Confederates have to deal with at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It had to be a mess.
It is a mess.
Oh, it is a mess. And that's what I go back to as being a big reason why the hill wasn't attacked. Why, we want to place so much blame at the end of the day on Ewell for not following up. But who's he have?
I always
got
say
two
this.
brigades available, which is Avery and Hayes.
Yeah.
Gordon's been sent out the road because
Gordon
of,
and Billy Smith are out the York Road because Billy Smith
because there
reported
might be a
troops out
fence
there.
attacking them out there.
Rhodes is essentially spent.
Well, now hold on. Hold on. Isn't Williams coming from the east?
He was.
Williams.
Oh, Williams, yeah.
But he's not where Billy Smith said he saw people.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
But Billy Smith, for people who aren't, you got to be a real diehard Gettysburg buff to know who this guy is. Okay.
Yeah.
But he's one of the brigade commanders, and what makes
I know
him,
his son burned part of Chambersburg.
well, exactly right. And what makes him interesting is the fact that this guy had been a congressman prior to the war. He had been governor of Virginia, and he's governor elect. At the time of the Gettysburg campaign, he hasn't taken office yet, but he's been elected once again to another term as governor of Virginia. Early has to treat him with kid gloves. But Early also doesn't trust this guy.
Yeah.
And when Smith says, hey, there's Confederates out here on the York Road, which turns out to be apparently a fence line,
you got to check.
you got to check.
Yeah.
But you don't want to leave it up to him, so let's send Gordon out there. I know I can trust him.
So he sends two brigades
He sends
out
two
there.
brigades, right?
And keep in mind, Gordon has been engaged. He has taken losses against Mr. Channing.
Sure.
I mean, Mr. Barlow. So he has, and he's followed up right into the town. So let's give Gordon a break. Let him go out there. Like Rich says, we can trust him, but he's also taken some heat. Let's keep the other ones, Avery and Hayes, closer at hand.
Yeah. And Ewell isn't. We always have this. Well, if Jackson had been here, he would have taken the hill, right? We always hear this. I think Ewell is still fairly aggressive at the end of the day. I mean, he's still thinking in terms of we might be able to take this high ground. There are a series of messages between Ewell and Lee. The one we always hear is the famous "take the hill if practicable" order. Yeah. But the first communication is from Ewell to Lee, where he essentially sends a messenger to Lee and says, if we all go up the hill together, I think we can take it. Now, I think what's happening here, and we've got to go back to what happened earlier in the day when Rhodes attacked and didn't get any help. I think this is Ewell in a very polite, Victorian-like manner saying to Robert E. Lee, hey, if I go up that hill, he's coming with me this time, right? I don't want to do this again by myself, right?
Right, yeah, sure.
And then, of course, Lee sends the message back and says, no, Hill's not going to be part of this. He's beat up. We're going to hold him west of town. And then here's the famous order.
All right.
Take the hill if practicable. But according to Lee, the second half of the sentence is, do not bring on a general engagement. The rest of the army is not up yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, that's a lot different than go take the hill.
Yeah.
But
it is.
But if you ask Isaac Trimble, all you need is a regiment.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, Trimble's fantastic. I mean, Trimble's the perfect example of I've got it figured out 20 years down the road.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Isaac Trimble's an absolute genius in 1883.
Yeah. So, okay, so they don't take the hill, but let's go into this for a second. What is Ewell dealing with on the ground when this idea of taking this hill is in the air?
He's dealing with disorganized troops who have been fighting all afternoon.
Disorganized troops, number one.
He's dealing with the men who don't have ammunition. They're running out.
Running out of ammo,
He's
number
got
two.
No artillery support.
No artillery,
No
number three.
artillery platform. We talked over and over about how flat this is.
Yeah.
Okay, the only artillery he has is up here. And that's not going to suffice.
Right.
That's not going to do him any good.
Right.
The artillery, Confederate artillery that is firing at Cemetery Hill is probably Hill's men over on Seminary Ridge. They're the only ones that really can engage the Union troops on Cemetery Hill.
Right.
So
But only part of Cemetery Hill.
but only part of Cemetery Hill. Ewell doesn't have support from Hill.
Right.
And you've got another factor. How are you going to get at the hill?
How are you going to get out the
coming
hill?
to town?
Ewell's guys are in the town.
Yeah.
You can't deploy lines of battle in the town. You'd have to march up Baltimore Street, march up Washington Street, march up Stratton Street, in a column.
Yeah.
And then begin to deploy when you cleared the buildings.
Right.
And at that point, you're looking at 42 guns up on Cemetery Hill that are going to be looking right down on you.
And this is going to be rearing its ugly head on the evening of day 2 with Hayes and Avery sitting there all day, in a line of battle under the guns in a
Yeah, basically in Weinbrenner's Run, trying to stay out of sight.
In a ditch, right.
Is he able to get any artillery in town? Because High Street, it's high. It's
You
a
really
bridge
don't
there.
have, a good line of sight.
How
Right.
many guns are you going to put on
You
High
might
Street?
be able to
4.
put 2 guns in an intersection. Maybe, right?
4, I think I'll
yeah.
put somebody's backyard.
Exactly.
All right. So now, but
And he's running out of daylight.
He's running
This is
out of
another
daylight.
Running out
factor.
of daylight?
People.
Yeah.
This happens time and time again on tours. People say, "Well, it's July.
right.
The sun goes down at 8:30."
Yeah. Not
Not
then.
in July of 1863. Sunset's going to be closer to 7 p.m.
Yeah.
because you've got the hour, which of course is daylight saving time, but then you also have the fact that you don't have the standardized time zones until 1883.
Right.
So we got to look at solar noon. When's the sun directly
Right,
overhead?
right.
That was noon.
Yeah.
And I think it's 1:20. With daylight saving time in effect. So everything's like an hour and 20 minutes earlier.
Interesting.
So if the sun goes down at 8:30 today, it's going to go down at 10 after 7.
Yeah.
And it's 1863. The sun goes down, and they flip the switch. It got dark.
And the only
Right.
fresh troops that Ewell has available is Allegheny Johnson.
Right.
And he's not on the field.
He's not here.
He's not on the field.
Plus, and I think I don't think we can ignore this. Night fighting is not easy.
No.
Sure.
It's tough.
They
And
would
the
find
only-
that out on
right.
day 2.
And the
Gotta be
only reason
blinding.
that Ewell has this job is the last guy who had that job tried to make a night attack at Chancellorsville and got shot by his own people.
Right.
Yeah.
If I'm Ewell, I'm thinking, well,
Yeah. No.
do I really want to do this at night? Probably not. It didn't end well for Jackson, right?
No.
But am I making too much of the threat of Williams' division over on the left as well?
You can't ignore it.
You can't,
if
no.
you're getting a report, and again, this is us today knowing where Williams actually was.
Right.
But yeah, there's 5th Corps units out there,
Yeah.
and there's 12th Corps out there.
Yeah.
So how close are they? They do capture a courier. The Confederates do capture a courier late on the second day, apparently in town. Apparently, this poor guy didn't know that the Union Army had retreated south of town, and he's riding into Gettysburg from the east.
Oh, that must have been embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly. And he gets captured actually by the Confederate reconnaissance party that was supposed to check out Culp's Hill.
Oh, all right.
And he's got orders for the 5th and the 12th Corps to come up
So this is on the
end of the first day.
first day. Okay.
Yeah,
I thought you said second.
because there is a reconnaissance sent there.
Yeah.
Ewell's thinking, and again, it makes sense. Tracy just mentioned the fact that Ed Johnson's guys are delayed. They're not going to come marching into Gettysburg until after the sun goes down. But there's still this thought that if we can put them up on Culp's Hill on the evening of July the 1st and occupy that hill, you're outflanking that Union stronghold on Cemetery Hill.
Yeah.
And really, what helped the Union with that cause was disobeying orders, with Ira Grover bringing his
7th Indiana.
7th Indiana up. He wasn't supposed to be here, but he said, "I'm not missing out on this." They were guarding the trains, and he said, "We're going." I mean, he
Great.
didn't have orders to move here, but fortunately he did, and that was the fresh troops that were anchoring the right of the Union line on Culp's Hill.
So
This is a
Hancock
regiment-
didn't order them up there.
Not engaged at all during the first day. Like
Okay.
I said, they're guarding wagon trains. Grover takes it on himself to bring his guys up here, and he arrives with this, unbloodied regiment on Cemetery Hill, and it's probably Hancock that says, "Okay, take those guys over to the summit of that hill."
Right.
Oh, he does. So Hancock does tell him.
Hancock would have sent them there,
Okay.
but they're not supposed to be on Cemetery Hill. They're supposed to be guarding wagon trains.
Gotcha.
And they ambush the reconnaissance party. And again, here's where we got to put the human element in this.
Yes.
We can't say, "Oh, well, reconnaissance party went up there and they found one regiment."
Right.
Okay, I'm a guy in that reconnaissance party. Okay, there's maybe a dozen guys. Okay, we're trying to find out if Culp's Hill is occupied in strength. It's dark. It's in the woods. I'm creeping up through the woods, and suddenly people start shooting at me.
Yeah.
Right? So if I make it out of this, and several guys in the reconnaissance party are either killed or wounded, if I'm one of the guys that gets back to Ed Johnson and Ewell, and they ask me how many Yankees are up on that hill, my answer is all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the whole Army of the Potomac up there, right?
Sure, yeah.
I'm not saying, there was only 450 guys. No, I mean, a lot of people were shooting at us from the trees.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You have no idea what you can't see.
Yeah.
I get it.
Or you always fear the worst.
And that. Fear the
Especially
worst?
at night.
It's definitely
Especially
at
in
night.
the dark,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so line up the troops for us then at the end of July 1st. Where's the left and right of each army? And
Well, the left of the Union Army is going to be John Geary's division of the 12th Corps down somewhere around the Little Round Top area.
okay.
Out in front of him at the famous Peach Orchard will be eventually the remnants of Buford's men,
Right.
his 2 divisions. His 3rd still isn't up yet, his 3rd division under Wesley Merritt. And then the other units are falling in on Cemetery Ridge up to the hill, Cemetery Hill itself, before hooking back around through Stevens Knoll, down in that little swale there, back up to Culp's Hill. And the extreme right, Matt, is something that you alluded to earlier with Alpheus Williams' division, somewhere out there on the Hanover Road. Eventually, they'll be recalled and brought back into Culp's Hill as well.
Okay. Whoops.
You didn't need that phone.
I
did
don't
you?
know. Certainly not.
Want me to take the Confederate position?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we've got Ed Johnson's unit would be the extreme left of the Confederate Army at this point, and they're out on the Hanover Road, out towards the Benner's Hill area, east of town. You've got Early's division, primarily Avery and Hayes in Weinbrenner's Run, right there along the southern edge of town, where the school buildings are today. Rhodes is on Middle Street. Now, for the first time, Ewell's Corps and Hill's Corps have actually made contact with one another.
Okay.
So now we have, the Hill's troops, Pender's division, and to some extent what's left of Heath's division, extending south from the seminary, probably down to, maybe down towards where the North Carolina Monument is today.
Okay.
In that area.
Okay.
And I failed to mention that the last remnants of the 1st Corps arrived. That's Stannard's brigade, Vermonters.
Right.
They're coming in, as well as the 3rd Corps.
And where were they all day?
Stannard?
Yes.
They were on the march up here. They
were further away.
Yeah, they were
They
also
started-
guarding wagons, so
Right,
they're not with
right.
the main body of the Corps.
And they are, that was the famous 9-month regiment that many of them weren't even supposed to be here.
Right, right.
They had a few weeks left, but they end up, being a big part of the battle on day 2 and 3.
Yes.
And because they haven't been bloodied yet, they're big regiments.
They are.
On
Quite-
average, we're talking, a
Over
typical
700
regiment here
men
is
in
like
some of them.
350 guys, and they're 600 to 700 men in each regiment.
Yeah. Okay. And then the 3rd Corps, you said, was the other one, right?
Yeah, parts of the 3rd Corps will be arriving that evening as well. They won't be up full strength till the following day.
All right. Are we ready to get to our listeners' questions?
Well, let's do one more thing here.
Okay.
Because we're winding down with day 1.
Yes, sir.
It's clearly a Confederate victory. And I think it's, we talked about this early on this evening. Why is day 1 important?
Okay.
If you go to Busey and Martin, the top 10 Union regiments with the highest casualties, I think 7 out of those 10 are first and
day.
11 Corps.
Yeah.
And that's first day.
Yeah.
So day 1 was a bloody event.
You mean it wasn't a skirmish like
Ken Burns claims?
The best.
No.
These are the numbers I came up with earlier today.
Okay, go.
Because it's tough. Because of course you're dealing with units that fight on more than one day of the battle.
Right.
So you have to try to do some guesstimating.
Sure.
Union losses on the first day, 9,139 men.
Okay.
Out of roughly 20,000 on the field. Confederate losses, about 6,800.
Wow.
So that's a nasty little fight.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
it absolutely is.
Either it's a nasty little fight or a pretty horrible big skirmish.
Yeah. It's not a skirmish, believe me.
Well, no, and what's the number thrown around? If Gettysburg only lasted one day, it's still the 12th largest battle
it's
of the
top,
Civil War.
I've heard
in the top
15,
20 somewhere.
Yeah. So I mean, this is obviously a significant battle that occurred here on July the 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the more I learn about it, the more fascinating it is to me because it seems just like a mess. Like they're just figuring it out and just throwing troops in.
I mean, a skirmish that started with a couple thousand men on each side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, there's close to 50,000 people in
Yeah, it's crazy.
So,
just
so it's
build.
30,000 of them are Confederates.
Yes.
It spirals out of control quickly.
Yeah. It's great.
Anybody that was within about 12 miles of where we're sitting right now became part of the first day's field.
Getting sucked
they
in.
got here in time to be part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whether Reynolds intended on the hills south of town or not, we'll never know.
Right.
But
that's where they
that's
ended up.
where
That's
it
where they
ended up.
ended up.
Okay, and then where's Meade? Does Meade make it here?
Meade is going to arrive finally. He's going to be at his headquarters in Taneytown, and he will get all his orders put out to the rest of the Union Army to saddle up, boys. We're burning daylight. Let's get everybody on the roads to Gettysburg. He's going to arrive somewhere around midnight. Give or take, and he's going
got
to
wait for couriers to come back.
Yeah. Right.
Because people always ask me, why didn't he just come up to the field? Well, first of all, you're in charge of the army.
Right.
Part of the army's engaged here. You're sending orders to Kohr that are 15, 20 miles away, or in the case of the 6th Corps, even further away. Mm-hmm. And you're waiting for these couriers to come back. You have to make sure that all of these guys have received their orders. You don't want to be on the road somewhere where they can't get in touch with you.
Right. Yeah.
And one person he's waiting for is Hancock to return.
Right. And Hancock.
I love how people think that the guy at the top has the cushy job.
No.
Yeah.
It's just there's more bullshit than what you have to deal with on the floor.
And remember, this is Meade's first week at the job.
Yeah.
Right? He's been in command
first
now, 3
couple
days.
3
days.
June the 28th, right? Okay.
It's amazing to me how perfect everybody is until they actually get to do the job. All right, now we're ready for the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, by the way, I want to remind you that for these Ask a Guys, when you want to ask a question, you got to become a patron. Our patrons, they get everything over there. They get early access. Mike Lentz, you're a patron.
I am.
And he's allowed 6 questions.
And he's allowed he gets 6 questions.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
tiers go up, right? You get a certain amount of questions per tier, right?
Yeah, some people take a little too much, but that's okay. Give them an inch, they take a mile. But we're going to, so you got to become a patron. Go to patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. All right, we've only got 4 questions for this one here. Brian Derenick says, while many events led to the withdrawal of the Union First Corps off Seminary Ridge on the afternoon of July 1st, is there any specific battle action or military decision that can be viewed to be the main reason which resulted in the First Corps position to become untenable?
There's a lot of people coming this way with a different color uniform than they had on. That's really what it comes down to. Okay.
Well, yeah, kind of like Pickett's quote for the Union on the first day. I think the Confederates had something to do with it.
Exactly, and that really is it. I mean, this is ultimately going to come down to a numbers game.
Yeah.
I don't know what else Union commanders could have done. Yeah. I really think they held on until the last possible moment before they pulled back. But
when you analyze everything that happened here, it's amazing they were able to hold on against that overwhelming number. Yep. As long as they did.
Yeah. No, especially when you look at the 11th Corps position.
Yeah. And people sometimes look at the casualties and say, well, the 11th Corps didn't suffer as many casualties as the First Corps. They didn't inflict as many casualties on the Confederates as. Okay, it's a very different battlefield north of town than it is west of town.
Yeah.
And, again, I think the 11th Corps did as well as they could. I sometimes tell people that, one of the problems that Oliver Howard has throughout the war is he can never find a hill when he truly needs one. Okay, and, it definitely happened here that his corps is just out in the open.
Yeah. All right, Rich, can you provide a summary of the activities of the 143rd Pennsylvania on July 1st?
Well, like a lot of these units, they move around quite a bit. So they arrive on the field during that midday lull we were talking about earlier. Initially take position along the McPherson Farm Lane, which would have extended from the Chambersburg Pike to the east side of the barn and over towards the farmhouse itself, which no longer stands. They get moved to the Pike, facing north, when Rhodes' division reaches the field. Towards the end of the day, they maintain that same position on the Pike where their monument is today, but now they're facing west as the Confederates come in from that direction. Then they fall back to the Thompson House, the famous stone house that eventually becomes Lee's headquarters. They're part of the stand on Seminary Ridge, and then, of course, they're going to retreat along what they described as a elevated roadway into town. And what they're talking about is the unfinished railroad bed. As it were, paralleled the Chambersburg Pike.
How much damage, Rich, do they inflict on Scales' brigade? Do they help with that?
They do help with that. This is one of the problems with trying to figure out Confederate losses is some of these units seem to underreport their losses, and Scales is a good example of that. Yeah. Scales' brigade went in with 1,500 people. They reported 545 casualties. But and Scales is one of them. He's wounded here on the first day. And one of the officer took over, though, says he only had 500 guys in line at the end of the day. So they're obviously underreporting their casualties. And yeah, the 143rd, 149th, 150th, the Iron Brigade, Stewart's Battery, that's who's inflicting the casualties on Scales' brigade when they're making the final Confederate assault towards the seminary. Because Scales' brigade's making a frontal attack. I mean, they're coming right at these guys, and it's open ground. And there's more artillery per yard there than there is on Cemetery Ridge on July the 3rd.
What does the 143rd do for the rest of the battle?
Largely in reserve. They're initially held in reserve in the Evergreen Cemetery area. Late on the 2nd, they, along with the rest of Stone's brigade, get moved down the Tawnytown Road, rather, and then actually advance out to the skirmish line on the Emmetsburg Road after the fighting on day 2 is essentially over. They pretty much spend the night out there. July the 3rd, they're in reserve just south of the copse of trees. The 143rd in particular seems to get hit hard during the artillery barrage prior to Pickett's charge. I think they lost 17 men to artillery fire on July the 3rd. So they're positioned right behind one of the batteries. I think they're right behind Rorty's battery, which gets hit pretty hard. But really, as far as, infantry combat, day 1 was the only really infantry combat they're engaged in here.
That was their day.
Yep.
All right. Roy Mead says, I thought I read a few times that officers from different regiments of the 1st Corps did not think they could hold their positions in the early afternoon lull in the fighting, and the 11th Corps could not quite connect with the 1st Corps completely. Why didn't General Howard move back to Cemetery Hill and Ridge where he could consolidate his smaller forces?
Well, if he's talking about Wadsworth, Wadsworth did lack some. I don't know what word I'm looking for. He's not a military professional. No, he is not a military professional. He's a politician, but he does a fairly decent job, I think. But he did pull his troops back prematurely, and he is ordered back, and he eventually comes back up here into line. But, his men initially got here and deployed, again, fairly open ground. We talk about the open plain that the 11th Corps had. When Wadsworth came in, I mean, as we look down here now, we can see how open that is. And he moved out against an overwhelming number of Davis's Mississippi and North Carolinians who essentially came around. We talked about this, flanked them.
Right.
He probably, he was holding the right flank of the Union line at that point. He probably thought, they're coming around the flank. We have to pull back and regroup. I have to believe that the moment got the better of him.
Okay.
The moment got the better of him because he wasn't prepared to stand and fight, and his men were kind of scattered too. He had men down that he couldn't access to help him immediately down by the barn, down by the McPherson farm, and the 147th certainly.
Yeah, I mean the line's not a perfectly straight line.
No, it is not.
It
It's
changes
kind of
based on the terrain.
It's right. It goes along the contours of the ground.
And I think also, First Corps commanders, they got bloodied. During the morning action,
did.
some of the regiments got beat up pretty bad. Of course, they're going to get hit hard in the afternoon action, but they could also see the Confederate buildup on Hers Ridge.
Yeah.
Hers Ridge was fairly open. The ground from the McPherson's ridges to Hers Ridge was fairly open. So they're seeing what definitely looks like an overwhelming Confederate force coming online.
That's a really good point about that they could see Hers Ridge, because if you stand out there today, you can't really see all the because of the trees in between.
Yep.
But like that picture you were talking about earlier, you can see everything. There's no trees.
Yeah.
It's just this wide open ridge.
Right.
Now, from Howard's perspective, why isn't he pulling them back to Cemetery Hill earlier? I made this analogy earlier today when we were talking before we started, the show. He's looking at this as, I need to buy as much time as possible.
Right.
I don't want to give the Confederates time to get reorganized and launch an attack on the high ground south of town.
What I want to hold.
Right.
Yeah.
The analogy I made earlier is he's trying to make the Confederates go 90 yards to score a touchdown instead of 10.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There's 2 minutes left in the game. The other guys have the ball. You're down by a touchdown. You want them to have to go the whole field.
Sure.
To score, right? And that's what Howard's mentality is.
Well, and it's kind of like the same mental gymnastics that Sickles tried to get everybody to do after the war by saying that Longstreet told him that his corps being out there took the punch out of his attack.
Right.
So you got to take the punch out of there. You got to tucker them out just as much. Because if you can allow all those fresh Confederates, or mostly fresh Confederates, to attack you on the objective you want to hold, you run the risk of losing it.
Yeah.
So
and another factor here is Howard's expecting more people to arrive. He knows the 12th Corps is only 5 miles down the road.
Yeah.
But they're not coming. They're still down at 2 taverns. They don't, and Slocum doesn't come up until very late in the day.
Yes.
So I think throughout this battle, he's standing on the Cemetery Hill at his headquarters.
Yeah.
Looking south on the Baltimore Pike.
Where is everybody?
He was doing the same thing Buford was doing earlier.
Yeah.
Is help on the way.
Yes.
Right. So
Howard's probably up there mumbling to himself, the devil's to pay.
Yeah. Maybe. He's got bigger problems than Buford did that morning. Believe me.
Yeah.
Well, now we're up to old 6 questions. How many you got here today? I only see 1 question mark.
Eric said I could only have 1.
You cut him down, Eric? Good for you. Good job. All right, Mike, go ahead. You can ask it.
All right. When it concerns the interpretation of the battlefield, outside of the first shot, the first day seems to take a back seat to the other 2 days. For example, only 3 stops on the self-guided auto tour concerned fighting on the first day. How much did Union veterans and their views about the first day and its fighting shape how we see the battlefield today?
Well, a lot of the officers who would write reports are dead. And we talked about this a little bit. You get individuals, and how does this guy get mentioned so much? I mean, Sickles says the first day didn't matter. It was a skirmish. It didn't matter.
He says, we did not think the battle started until July the 2nd.
Yeah. So, we have incidents like that. Ask anybody who fought on July 1st.
Right.
How important it was and how dangerous it was and how deadly it was out here. And you'll get a different answer. I think after, if the listeners, just take what we've been talking about for the last 2 hours and consider that, I think they'll see pretty quickly day 1 wasn't a skirmish.
No,
it wasn't a skirmish.
I think the other thing here is you're dealing with. You don't have the dramatic vistas. You don't have the dramatic events here that you have later. on other parts of the battlefield.
Right.
You don't have the spectacular view you have from Little Round Top, right? You don't have, the rugged terrain of Devil's Den.
There's plenty of other places in the Northeast that look similar to what we're looking at now, but not down there.
Right.
But I'd even take issue with that when you start looking at these individual vignettes. You look at the Iron Brigade, and you look at Stone's Brigade, and you look at Iverson and how Daniel attacked, and you look at all of them.
I know.
That's true. That is absolutely true. But also we have to look at the beginnings of visitation here.
Yeah.
Right.
If you came to Gettysburg, in the Memorial Association era, before, they started laying out park roads, before they started, leading tours around the field, so to speak, the places that people went to initially were Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill.
Right.
Right, those were the kind of the keystones of the entire battlefield in the eyes of the public.
Sure.
In the first 15 years after the battle. Why? Because Culp's Hill, you can see the physical evidence. Mm-hmm. The breastworks were still there. There's trees there. They were shot to pieces, and of course, Cemetery Hill was, the place where the fallen were and where Lincoln spoke. Then, about 20 years after the battle, the focus starts to shift to the high water mark. Right? Why? Because now Batchelder is kind of playing up the whole Pickett's Charge.
He's in the picture.
Right. And eventually it shifts, when the trolley comes onto the scene and when we start to see park roads being laid out, then the focus starts to shift to Little Round Top. You never really saw that visitation coming out here.
Yeah.
Out here to day one. There's so it kind of does get overlooked. I mean, I hate to admit this because I'm a first day guy, but if I'm pressed for time on a tour, I won't come out here to day one.
Yeah.
I'll skip day one and start on, the Confederate line or, and start setting up day two and talk just briefly about the first day.
And it certainly will get a moment in the sun when the Eternal Light Peace Memorial is dedicated.
Yeah, 1938. Yeah,
1938.
Yeah.
75th anniversary. That monument goes up. It's unveiled. FDR speaks, and 250,000 people are out here all of a sudden.
And along Buford Avenue there, wasn't that in private hands until the 1960s?
Well, as a matter of fact, the Peace Light Inn sat right down here at the intersection.
Yeah.
Just across the street from the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry Monument.
But those tablets that are on either side of the road up by Wadsworth statue.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Is that 1963?
I think so. Yeah.
Is that the year?
You had the old Sheeds museum and motor court that sat across from the West End Guide Station, and that was there until the 1980s.
That's right. Yeah.
You look at the development of the battlefield, as a park, and the early emphasis is Union veterans, of course, preserving their lines. Then we start to see some thoughts given to preserving the Confederate lines on day 2 and day 3. Mm-hmm. But these are narrow swaths of ground that were being purchased and preserved with the ground on either side still in private hands. Mm-hmm. There was an airport right down here below us up until, the 1930s. And actually, apparently got...
Iverson's Pitts International Airport.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently it actually saw some service during the Second World War. Where they were actually they were doing training down here with night landings. They had spotlights on the old Oak Ridge Tower lighting up the runways. So, the evolution of this place as to what we see today, is just as fascinating sometimes as what happened during those 3 days of July.
The whole Addressing Gettysburg thing originally was going to be a documentary about tourism here. And one of the taglines that we were toying with using was history is how you see it. And the meaning of that was every generation sees this place or any place differently based on various factors. And one of them is what's available to see.
Yep.
And also who's telling you the story and what is he focusing on or she focusing on. And so you're only really able to know what you're shown. And let's face it, most people aren't curious enough to go and dig any deeper. So it's just whatever you see.
And to be fair, and Mike, going back to your question, the latest generations, going back the last 25, 30 years, have been influenced very, very highly by Ken Burns' Civil War and by the Killer Angels in the movie Gettysburg. And where did they focus primarily? You know, Buford's battle didn't amount to a whole lot in those movies. He was here, but it was primarily south of town as well.
And Ken Burns just says, you know, compared to the rest of the battle today, the first day was a minor skirmish.
Yeah.
It's just insane. But yeah. All right. Anything else you'd like to add, gentlemen?
Not for me.
All right.
I think we've pretty well covered it.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Thank you very much for coming on and doing this again, guys. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I was late. It was my doctor's fault. And 6 questions. Thank you, as always, for your assistance there with the map. And Eric, thank you for putting this together. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Tomorrow, the July 2nd anniversary episode comes out. And what are we going to be talking about on that one, Eric?
July 2nd.
There you go. All right, we'll talk to you all later. Have a good one.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man forget shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man forget shall go to jail